Just wonder if anybody can hear me or not.
Yes, we can.
Great, thanks.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Good to see people here and online, and I'm glad everyone made it through the storm over the last couple of days. So good to see you. We'll start off with an acknowledgement as we always do. I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting today on the traditional unceded territory of the Comox First Nation, and that the Comox Strathcona Waste Management Service Area includes the Coast Salish, Wakwaka'wakw, and the Chalmouth territories. And the first piece of business is approval of the agenda. Any questions on the agenda? If not, I'll take a motion to approve it. Okay, that's been moved and seconded. I didn't see any questions. Any opposed? That passes. And we also have adoption of minutes from October 31st. Moved and seconded. Any questions or comments on those minutes? Okay, any opposed to adoption? And that passes, and then we'll just get into reports. So first is the Comox Strathcona Waste Management Advisory Committee. I'll just hand that over to our, I guess, are there any questions on that? That's just for receipt. Okay, not seeing any opposed to receipt? Oh, sorry. Yeah, so let's someone move it first. Okay, thank you. Moved and seconded. Any questions? And that passes receipt. And next is the Construction Renovation and Demolition Waste Reduction Strategies Report. And I'll pass it over to our CAO, James, for receipt. Motion? Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and good morning to the directors. Sarah Willey, our Manager of Solid Waste Planning and Policy Development, will be introducing the staff report as well as introducing our guest presenter. So Sarah, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you through the CAO to the chair. Pleased to have a speaker today to speak with us about construction, renovation, and demolition waste reduction strategies. So we've been working closely with Gil through this process, and as well, he's had a chance to interview a number of stakeholders in our community to bring a local approach to his expertise in this area. So I'm pleased to introduce Gil Huron, the Managing Director of Circular Innovation at Lighthouse, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to advancing circular practices in the built environment. Gil leads a dedicated team of professionals in advancing policy research and practices, as well as technologies that help avoid and reduce construction, renovation, and demolition waste. He has more than 20 years experience in solid waste, extended producer responsibility, green building, and circular economies. He's called on by local governments across Canada to advise on the application of circular economies in the built environment. Gil holds a Bachelor of Laws and Master of Laws, and most recently co-authored a Blueprint for Change, Preventing Demolition Waste Through Home Relocation and Deconstruction. I'll pass it over to Gil.
Thanks, Sarah. Don't touch it. I'm good. Okay. Red is go and green is stop. Good morning, Mr. Chair, directors. Thank you for the opportunity to present to you this morning. There's a set of materials that's been provided to you, and I'm just going to speak to those and provide a little more context as we go through them. So I'll just start with the agenda here. I'm going to just give a brief overview of the strategic approach taken to this assessment, and then review the guiding principles that were that are applicable that were developed during the second phase of the renewal process for the solid waste management plan. And then comment on the particular context within the CSWM's jurisdiction that relate to construction, renovation, and demolition waste. Then focus a bit on the outcomes from the interviews that we had with stakeholders in the region. And finally, get into the details of the various strategic options that we're proposing for your consideration. So when we look at the issue of construction, renovation, and demolition waste diversion, there are two principles that we want to focus on. Sorry, I need to keep clicking here. Two principles we want to focus on to frame our thinking. One is to prioritize source reduction. So that is the very highest level of the pollution prevention hierarchy, focused on reducing the amount of materials that we're bringing into the environment, and then to reuse what we do generate in terms of waste materials at their highest and best use. Something that I like to do, and so I don't want to confuse you, I like to move away from the language of waste and talk about waste as a resource. So I will often refer to these construction, renovation, and demolition materials or resources rather than waste. But we're talking about the output, the waste that what we normally consider as waste. So the other part I want to introduce is the idea of a circular economy, and where we focus on and that tie into the CSWM's goals to both not only eliminate waste and recirculate materials in the economy, but also to divert those materials from landfill. So those are the framework within which we're taking a look at this. So when we look at the guiding principles that were developed, almost all of them apply to this discussion, but there are three that we wanted to highlight for you. One is to maximize the beneficial and best use of waste materials and manage residuals appropriately. So that again is the focus on reuse. Preventing organics and recyclables from going into garbage. The organics here being wood. Wood is one of the, and I'll get to it, it's one of the largest components of CRD waste and also of organics in our waste stream. And then to build and support collaborative partnerships to achieve regional targets set in plans. A lot of the initiatives that we're proposing, because of the scale of what we're looking at, really require a joint effort between local municipalities and not just within the Comox Strathcona jurisdiction, but also other regions, neighboring regions as well. So when we look at the CSWM's area of operations from perspective of CRD waste, we have obviously the two major waste management centers, Comox Valley and Campbell River, both of which currently divert drywall, wood waste, and metal. Comox Valley also diverts rubble. And then we have the more regional transfer stations and landfills, Gold River, Hornby, and Cortez Island diverting wood waste and metal currently, and Sayward, Tassus, and Sabalas diverting metal. That's the current context in terms of what's going on for diversion of these materials. And we also have a number of private operators, including Northwind Environmental Landfill, which is right next door to the Campbell River Waste Management Center, Pacific Wood Waste in Courtney and Campbell River, and Allen Sons in Campbell River. All of these operations take CRD waste and to some degree divert certain materials when it suits them. Campbell River does not accept anything larger than a 20-yard bin, and dump trucks and trailers are rerouted either to the Comox Valley Center or to private operators. So as I mentioned, CRD materials represent the second largest category of materials received currently. And in the 2012 Solid Waste Management Plan, there was an overall diversion target set of 70% by 2022. What we're seeing when we look at the ticket, the data coming from the waste scales, is that the amount of CRD material diverted is actually decreasing over the last several years. So in 2022, just under 50% of those materials were diverted. And in 2023, that dropped to just shy of 42%. Of the 50+% that is not currently diverted. There was an audit done in 2017 where it was estimated that 18% of that material could be diverted. It's divertible materials like wood, metal, and such. Another 24% are materials that technically can be diverted. There is the technology exists to manage those materials, but not locally. So things like carpet and asphalt shingles, those types of things are. And then 58% of what the balance of it is not divertible. It's things like composite materials and other things that are just very difficult to reuse or recycle. Another thing to note is that Northwind Environmental site has seen exponential growth in the amount of CRD material that they're receiving. They went from 121 tons in 2019 to over 8,200 tons in 2023. That followed the opening of their landfill in 2021. So what we're seeing is an increase in the amount of materials that are being landfilled and a decrease in the amount of materials that are being diverted currently. That's the bottom line of all those numbers. So when we look at the materials that are being diverted, the four categories, just to give you a bit of insight into how they're currently being managed, clean wood waste is being sent primarily, although not exclusively, to the Catalyst paper mill in Port Alberni, and it's converted into compost and animal bedding. The gypsum and drywall is shipped to New West Gypsum in New Westminster, and it's processed there and then sent to another company nearby and actually reprocessed into new drywall. The aggregate is crushed and used as alternative daily cover. That's a pretty common practice for that kind of material. And then metal is segregated and sent to metal recyclers. I wanted to give you a bit of an kind of a view into the impact of development over the next little while in the region and how that's going to impact CRD waste generation. So as you can see from this chart, there's been, and you're probably well acquainted with all this. Oh, yeah, I keep changing on my, yes, sorry, my bad, sorry. There you go. Sorry about that. Okay, so you're obviously well aware of the increased pressure on housing, and we've seen a very rapid increase in the amount of housing that's been developed within this region, 250% increase over the last decade. And we expect this to continue for a number of reasons. One is the recent changes to zoning restrictions by the province that allow now for multi-unit residential construction on single-family lots, the decrease in interest rates, and the continued population growth experiencing. So all of that's putting pressure on housing, and it's going to result in more development. On the other side, when we look at demolitions, there's the data that we have doesn't show a correlation between, you'd expect to see an increase in demolitions while it corresponds in some way to the increase in housing development. But that's not, the data doesn't show that, but that might be for a couple of reasons, which I want to explain here. So this chart basically shows you the demolition permits that were issued over the last 6 years. You'll see that in 2023, there was a significant decrease, primarily in Campbell River. And this is just a guess, but it could be the result of two things. One is sometimes the building permits and deconstruction permits or demolition permits are coupled, and the building permit will be tracked, but the demolition permit won't. So it's possible that they just weren't tracked in this case. The other is that there's an inconsistency in the way that deconstruction permits are and data is tracked. And so it's very, quite inconsistent across jurisdictions. And so the quality of this data is we need to take it with a grain of salt. So if we look at the trend, though, it would suggest for Campbell River, at least, that that's a bit of an anomaly, maybe some error there, because the trend in the other regions and areas is pretty consistent. So you would expect Campbell River to be closer to what its historic average was. If that is the case, then we're seeing anywhere between, say, 50 and 70 demolitions happening every year in the area. And we expect that to increase. So we have 42% of existing housing stock is older than 1980. And so it's due either for renovation or possibly demolition. And we also have, in some areas, increased densification pressure, which is going to result in the removal of certain existing structures to make way for new builds. The other thing I want to make just point out is that CSWM does have variable tipping fees in place when it comes to construction, renovation, and demolition waste. The standard rate for mixed loads is $155 if it doesn't have recyclables in it. If you have recyclables, then there's an additional $210 levied on those loads. And there are reduced rates for clean loads of wood waste, gypsum, and rubble and metal, which are all recyclables. So it's great that that's in place. So that is just the context I wanted to provide to you to frame the discussion about the options that we're going to get into. But before we do that, I want to summarize for you the feedback that we received from interviewing 11 key stakeholders in the area. We reached out to landfill operators, building contractors, haulers, and house movers, basically anybody who touches this material, to get their impressions on existing policy and also some of the options that we're proposing here to test those out with them as well. So in general, there was a good degree of satisfaction with the CSWM's current policies and management practices, and an acknowledgement of the efforts of the staff in terms of managing facilities and in handling the clientele that are coming through and the materials as well. So that was great to hear. When it came to fees, that it was really kind of all over the map. Some people thought they were too high, some people thought they were too low, but most of them were kind of in agreement that they were, at the end of the day, reasonable as long as they were applied equally across the entire industry. And there was, but the important point that I took away from all the interviews, and it's corroborated by the data that we've looked at, is that there's no impact. The variable tipping fees don't seem to have an impact on sorting. So in other words, we're not seeing higher levels of diversion happening as the delta between the cost for mixed loads and sorted loads increases. So we've seen an increase in the amount of the cost of, or tipping fees, sorry, I should say, for mixed loads over the last 3 years in the region, but we've seen a corresponding decrease in the amount of material that's being diverted. You'd expect to see them moving in the same direction. The other thing one of the haulers mentioned was that they have a direct vested interest. Sorry, I should say one of the owner-operated haulers pointed out that they have a vested interest in sorting these materials, and they mentioned that they do sort materials before they take them to the landfill, because obviously they have a direct financial, they feel the direct financial impact of that, which they then pass on to their clients. Whereas they commented that from what they observed, the employees of corporate-owned haulers don't seem to have as much of a vested interest. And that higher fees at the facilities allow private facilities to set their fees at a rate that allows them to sort. So which was, I thought, a very interesting observation. So the regional policy around tipping fees is impacting the private operators in that way.
Yeah, does that work to take questions
fine with
as
me,
you're
yeah.
going
Yeah.
through? Yeah, please put your light on, Director McCullough.
That's an interesting last point. I just wanted to jump in with a question while we were on it. So, I mean, would you consider that last point a positive or a negative? Because I know as a service, we would like consistency in knowing where waste is going. But if the outcome of the higher tipping fee is that there's a secondary economy for the sorting, is that meeting our objective? Or, and maybe that's not necessarily a question for you, but for staff, would we see that creating an economy where there's a motivation for a private retailer to be doing the sorting, even if it's not the contractor that's doing the demolition?
Oh, absolutely.
Is that a positive?
Yeah, and in fact, I mean, in addition to so that comment came from a private landfill, but the haulers were also saying the same thing, basically, that, the higher the difference between the cost for a sorted load versus a mixed load, that the more incentive they have to sort, right?
Okay,
So everyone, it is doing that. Now, that's what they're saying, and the data is not showing that it's actually impacting, but that's where I come back to the other comment, that it seems that those comments came from private operators, owner operated, whereas the corporate owned, this is all hearsay in the sense that I didn't hear it directly from the corporate owned entities, but what the owner operator establishments are saying is that the corporate owned ones don't have that, that doesn't change their practices, right? They're not impacted. They just absorb the cost, or they pass it on, and they're just not changing their practices as a result.
right. So there's like two tracks of behavior
Right.
happening. Yeah.
And again, I don't have data to back this up, but based just on the landscape of who's operating in the region, I would say that the majority of waste is being hauled by corporate haulers and less by the owner operator ones. And that's probably why you're not seeing more sorting happening. So it's a picture that I'm painting that is based on information that I'm gleaning, and I'm drawing some assumptions from it. It's not, no one's kind of said that explicitly to me, but that's kind of what I'm deducing from it all.
Thank you.
All right, and Director Grieve, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just for clarity, Northwind, is that the private landfill in Solon?
No, it's an Uplands landfill is the one you're referring to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because this is the Campbell River?
Yeah, this is the one in Campbell.
Oh, okay, it's just a new name. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll just pick up where I left off here. So another area of comments received was around preventing contamination of loads. So the idea of mixed loads and other forms of contamination. One key stakeholder commented that nothing short of a ban is going to reduce mixed loads. And again, that kind of supports the data that's showing that variable tipping fees alone are not doing it. Another comment was that commercial haulers are avoiding penalties on mixed loads by using tipping trailers because they're not checked at the tipping phase. Now, I haven't been on site to verify that, but that is something that came from one of the haulers. So it's somehow the haulers are managing to get around the policies that are in place by using certain types of equipment. And the need for more consistent, streamlined handling of drywall loads by CSWM staff would be appreciated. That was something that they seem to think that different loads, depending on who's at the facility, they get assessed differently at different times. And finally, policies that disincentivize dumping, foster. Oh, so this is the last, yeah, this is another comment that was of interest. It ties, it's very similar to the one around the impact of higher fees for mixed loads. The one of the home movers also pointed out that the higher these fees go, the more it's driving interest in home relocation as an option as well, right? So the higher the cost to manage your waste, basically, people are going to start looking for other options to manage those.
So we've just got another question
Yeah,
here. I'm just going to pass it over to Director Mawhinney. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask you about the second point you were talking about, and I read it in the report that the mixed loads are being avoided the penalty because they're using these tipping trailers, but you said you didn't have any personal or experience in that. I was wondering if staff could comment on that, if that was something that staff had any information about.
So Jesse Lee is Comox Strathcona Waste Management Manager of Operations, and so we'll be able to provide some context around that without putting you on the spot, Jesse. But
Yep, no
certainly.
problem. I could comment on two of those statements is the that's a common one as far as what Gil referred to as people feeling that our staff are singling out certain people. Our staff are pretty consistent with that, but that's a comment I get quite a bit as the manager there. People feel they are, but it's not. It's we have a pretty standard policy on it. The tipping trailer area, I'm not sure where that came from. I know we do code those loads in there and stuff. We don't have a staff there all the time, but they're very close by and stuff, and they do inspect those loads, and we have coded loads that come in there as mixed with recycling at the higher rate. So that's new to me that people thought that was an angle. So I'll follow up with that a bit more. No, that answers your question. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Thanks. Go ahead, Gil.
Okay, and finally, just summarizing a couple of random different comments that I wanted to highlight. One is that it was repeatedly mentioned that convenience is a common consideration for waste haulers. So if they have to travel a shorter distance to dump, they'll do it. If they have a means of I lost my train of thought. Basically, anything that they can do to reduce the amount of effort that they have to take, it's going to impact their decisions. There was a number of comments that stressed the need for economical end markets for materials. A lot of the stakeholders said that they want to do the right thing with this stuff, but they just don't see viable options for those. There was a few comments about illegal dumping and wanting to see more disincentives or more penalties associated with that type of activity. And then several of the respondents commented on the need for more educational support. To learn to know what can be recycled and what is being recycled, so they have and also lower cost options for managing those materials. All right, so that brings me to the end of kind of the contextual piece, and now I'm going to dive into these options. So if there's any other questions at this point, it might be a nice time to just address those, but otherwise I'll just move on. Okay. All right. So I've put forward 8 strategic options or things you might want to consider. And we've identified, my understanding is that this is kind of the approach that's been taken with the other areas as well, that you've looked at other different waste categories. So wanted to frame them in the same way. Looking at the diversion impact of these various strategies, the impact on staffing and operations, and the financial implications, as well as whether regulatory authority would be required to proceed with these. I'm going to talk to 8A, B, and D, actually, and then I'm going to come back to C, because the way to operationalize A, B, and D are quite similar. And I also want to just point out that there was an error in the classification of. Just make sure I have it right. At the classification of the operational staffing impact for 8B and 8A, that should probably read low for both of those instead of medium and high. So you might want to just make that change in your notes if you. Okay, so I'll just move into each of these. So the first one is about pre-demolition assessments. The second one, mandatory compliance with pre-demolition assessments, and then the fourth one, early green removal permits, move-on permits, and expedited electrical disconnects. I'm going to speak to them all kind of in one breath. So pre-demolition assessments. The idea of this is that before a structure is to be removed, there would be an assessment done to determine whether it would be a candidate to be relocated, and if not relocated, then deconstructed either fully or partially. So again, trying to maximize the retention of the materials and divert them from landfill and keep them at their highest and best use. The impact of this type of policy can be profound. If you think about the amount of waste that's generated from each structure, about 100,000 kilograms of material comes out of a standard 2,000 square foot bungalow. About 60 to 80% of homes are, we estimate, are candidates for relocation or deconstruction. So they either have their bones are good or the materials within them are valuable enough that they're worth salvaging. And each deconstruction project can harvest about 85 to 90% of the materials that are coming out of a home. So when you look at that, the impact of having an assessment that identifies candidates for relocation or deconstruction is profound. It can have a very significant impact on diversion rates. The operational impacts are that there would be time required for staff to draft and consult a policy recommendation around this, but and then to consult with local governments, because this is really something that would have to be implemented at the municipal level. It's within the jurisdiction of municipalities. And so really the role of the CSWM in here is to facilitate that and that discussion with local, provide a framework and facilitate the discussion with the local governments. And similarly, that was where it should have read low in terms of operational impacts. And the corresponding financial implications are relatively low as well. Staff time required to implement or draft the policy and to facilitate those consultations. And again, for the CSWM, there wouldn't be any regulatory authority required to proceed with this. Keep trying to switch two sets of slides here. Why? It's not working anymore. I broke it. Thank you. Sarah to the rescue. Okay. There is no current example of or precedent for this in other jurisdictions. It's something that a number of local governments are considering in the Lower Mainland, and it's a policy initiative that's been put forward widely in the Lower Mainland, at least for consideration. But there are examples of requirements for assessments to be done. And even locally here, a couple of the local governments do have assessments that are required prior to homes being removed for different purposes, either restoration requirements, because the homes have heritage value to them, or to deal with other types of contaminated materials. So it's not, the idea of an assessment is not foreign to us. An extension of that initiative would be to require mandatory compliance with these assessments. So once an assessment is done, there would be a requirement for the contractor to actually comply with that assessment and have the home either removed or relocated or deconstructed. This is a policy that is well established in a number of jurisdictions, including the city of Victoria. So in the city of Victoria, they require that any home that is older than 1940 be deconstructed. And there's a refundable deposit that's required. The contractor has to put down $19,500. In Burnaby, that amount can go up as high as $50,000. They have a different way of calculating that refundable deposit. But essentially, there is a financial commitment that's made by the contractor to deconstruct, and then they have to provide evidence that the deconstruction was done and that the material was salvaged. So in Burnaby, we saw 29 demolitions occur between, sorry, that should read deconstructions, 29 homes deconstructed between October 22 and March 24th under their policy, resulting in about 9,500 metric tons of material being diverted. So an example of the impact that policy can have. The operational impacts here again would be, for the CSWM at least, would be low. That should read low. Again, it's because this is under the jurisdiction of local governments. So the role of the CSWM in this instance would be to potentially frame a policy around this and then consult with the local governments to try to create some type of standardization and uniformity in their implementation. And correspondingly, the financial implications for CSWM would be low as well, just the staff time required to facilitate that. I will note that the implications for the local governments are significant because they will need staff in place that can set up a framework for tracking the permits of properties that are being removed, and putting a administrative framework in place to collect the deposits, and then to evaluate and confirm the evidence that's provided by the contractor to confirm that the home was in fact relocated or deconstructed and salvaged. Yeah.
Hi, Gil, but there's a question from Director Grant. I just wanted, before that, you just said the impact on local governments would be significant, whereas in the staff report it says there'd be modest impacts on staff and operations for local governments on page 18. Just wondering if you can kind of square those two, and then once you've done that, I'll pass it over to Director Grant.
So what yeah, fair enough. I would say that for local governments, it would be not modest. It would be more on the significant side. So
that's going to require quite a lot of consultation along the development of it. But okay, well, it's good to get that clarified. It's quite a significant impact on local governments.
For the local governments, I would say, yeah, there's more involved for sure.
Okay, thanks, Gil. But I'll pass it over to Director Grant now. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Just wondering, from the contractor's point of view, how would this work? Like, you would come in, you'd apply for your building permit, you go through all the stuff here, and then you have to go through this. How long does this take? Like, is this a week, or is this 8 months before somebody can actually come out and do this? Because for these guys, time is money, right? And all of that delay is problematic for them. So if you can make it streamlined and easy, they probably won't care. But if it starts running into a really long process, it's just going to frustrate them, right? And we have the province telling us build, build, build. And then at every turn, we seem to be implementing things that are making it longer. So I just want to know, like, is this going to be an 8-month 2 months, 3 years? Like what would we be looking at?
So the administrative aspect of it, there shouldn't be any increase. And in fact, the other jurisdictions have expedited, and that's what the other option I'm going to talk about. They've expedited permits where structures are being deconstructed or relocated. The additional time, if any, comes in the actual deconstruction process. So the permit's issued, whether it's the building permit or it's a decoupled deconstruction permit that comes in advance, that permit's issued. This shouldn't impact that at all, but it does take the contractor potentially, depending on how they who they work with and how they do it. It can take them a little more time to do the actual deconstruction. So, but again, it's a policy that would impact everyone equally in the sense that, you know, right?
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out how to speed it up. That sounds like it might actually work. The other thing is you say financial impacts are low. That's low to the CVRD. What does that cost the contractor? So if you're trying to have cheaper housing, again, are we adding more costs or are we actually making it the same?
Yeah, so it's hard to, I want to be careful about how I speak to this point. It's difficult to provide a blanket statement in terms of the cost involved. There are generally, right now, it does cost a bit more to deconstruct a home than to demolish it, but it really depends on, like, I don't know what demolition companies are charging here to do this kind of work. It really, there's so many factors at play that impact that. But one of the proposals here is to offer an incentive for deconstruction as well. So the region would provide a modest financial incentive to contractors to offset that any difference in cost there. Because we recognize currently, as this is a relatively new practice, that it does potentially cost more. The idea is that as we transition this and more companies are doing it and getting better at it, the methodologies, approaches to doing deconstruction improve, that the costs, they'll become more efficient and the costs will go down. Plus, the development of end markets where these materials can actually be sold and actually have some value can offset the costs of the deconstruction itself. Okay. How am I doing for time? Because I want to. Okay. Yes. Okay. Like I said, I'm going to speak to Mr. Grant's point here or question here. One of the options we're presenting is the idea of expedited permits, both for the early removal of structures, whether it's through relocation or deconstruction, and an expedited move-on permit. So if you do relocate a home, imagine taking the home off a site. You don't want to have to park it somewhere temporarily. You want to be able to move it right away to its end destination. And so providing these early move-on permits allow the contractor to move that home and maybe not place it on its final foundation, but at least put it on the land where it's going to end up until the building permit is obtained for that location. And then the final piece is working with the local utility to get expedited electrical disconnects. This can speed up the time for these kinds of projects. Basically, yeah, getting the disconnection so that the crews can get on site faster to do the work. So in this case, we've considered that the diversion potential is moderate, medium. When you relocate a home, you're diverting essentially 75,000 kilograms of building materials on average out of landfill. And as I mentioned, the electrical disconnects provide an incentive to the contractor to consider deconstruction. The operational impacts would be low. Again, similarly, this is all a policy that that would have to be implemented at the municipal level. And so, again, the role of the CSWM would be to facilitate that process. And then similarly, the financial implications would be low. But again, this is why I tie all these three together, because I bundle them together, because they really are a piece that involves that CSWM providing kind of guidance and stewardship on this, but the actual implementation happens at the municipal level. And I just noted a couple of precedents at the bottom. The District of North Vancouver does offer expedited green demolition permits as part of their deconstruction bylaw. The town of Comox has a move-on permit, and Seattle's public utility, Seattle City Lights, does fast track their deconstruction projects, providing expedited electrical disconnects. Okay, now I'm going to go back to the previous one. This is the most significant proposal in terms of resources. What we're proposing here is a comprehensive regional strategy to salvage and process clean wood. So the region already diverts clean wood at the two major facilities. And what we're proposing here is that we expand this. So when you look at the diversion potential from the material that I shared with you earlier, there's about 1,000 tons, we estimate about 1,000 tons of clean wood that's still going into landfill, right? It's going in through mixed loads. And if you take the private landfills as well into consideration, there's about another 200,000 tons. That's just, did I say 200,000? No, 2,000 tons, right? 2,000 tons. Those are just estimates, so just want to be clear. There's also the potential GHG savings by diverting these organic materials, right? So there's a really still a very significant amount of material that needs to be harvested, and having this type of strategy in place would help achieve that. And basically what it involves is implementing a ban on clean wood, right? So right now we're relying on those variable tipping fees to incentivize diversion, but putting a ban in place that would keep the clean wood out of the landfill, and expanding the capacity at the Comox Valley Waste Management Center to receive and process that material.
Gil?
So, yeah.
Sorry,
Sorry, I
was just saying, if you happen to notice any lights on.
I should stop talking.
Yeah, if you can slow down at that point, that would be great. I'll
Okay.
take it to Director Terry, and where green means stop for you.
Got it. Got it. Sorry about that.
Just a quick clarification that this is annual numbers, 1,000,
Yes.
this 3,000 tons is
Yes.
annually?
Yes.
Okay, and then another clarification, is most of this coming from construction or demolition?
That I could not tell you.
Okay,
I would, yeah, I can't. We don't have that kind of breakdown in the data.
okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And my question is probably pretty quick too, but I didn't see this also identified in the report. I'm just not sure what you mean by clean wood. Like, does it mean wood that doesn't have any nails in it, or wood that doesn't have paint on it, or what exactly does that mean?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. And I might actually ask staff to clarify a bit on that too. It would definitely not include things like painted wood or treated wood like kerosene and that kind of stuff, but I'm not sure about nails.
Nails is fine. Yeah.
Nails are fine.
Yeah.
So
So
nails is clean.
painted and stained is not good. Anything with like a MDF is not great. So it's like dimensional lumber primarily.
So just to follow up on that, if I may, Chair. So if it's siding that has been stained and it's being removed, it would not be considered clean wood. So there's actually probably quite a bit more if you included the weight or the volume of dirty wood as well.
Dirty wood is a higher volume than clean wood typically, because the clean wood is either coming from construction offcuts or coming from the interior of the walls of a home during deconstruction. Otherwise, the majority of the wood is what we call dirty wood.
Okay. Oh, wow. Okay. And it's probably more per year with dirty wood. Oh, thank you.
All right, and
Mr. Grieve
Director
is-
Grieve, go ahead.
Thank you. Okay, through the chair. So I'm a little confused on some things. You talk about clean wood, but if it's, I just recently did an addition on my shop, and I very carefully removed the 1x10 cedar board and batten siding to use again. But that would be dirty wood in your world, right?
No. If,
It was stained.
oh, if it's stained, yes.
Well, the cedar is going to be stained. Okay, and so this is, and you're saying ban clean wood from private sites as well?
Well,
Why would that? I mean, are we trying to put ourselves in a position to benefit from this clean wood? Is that because I don't, you're talking about, you know, on the other hand, you're talking about deconstruction, but we're talking about butt ends of wood and pieces that are broken and whatever, but they're not painted. Is that correct? We're not talking about like a full 8-foot 2x4,
so.
which can be resold.
No, yeah, we're talking about all of that, both. And you know, with respect to the material that you're dealing with, like the cedar, if that was like shiplap, for instance, like on some of the older construction, you'd have 1x10.
You couldn't even find that stuff today.
Well, if you're deconstructing an older home, you would
Yes.
find it, right? So basically all of that type of material, both the offcuts and the stuff that's coming out of deconstructed homes would be diverted. And the reason that I've included the private facilities in there is because of currently the large amount of material that's going there. And the higher the differential in the tipping fees at the public facilities, the greater the incentive for haulers to take their mixed loads to the private sites, right? So you're going to see more, I'm guessing you're going to see more material, and you are seeing more material at Northwind, at least that we have the data for Northwind. You're seeing the volumes of CRD waste, which includes wood. They just take mixed loads.
So why would that
Is increasing.
benefit? Wouldn't that benefit our objective, which is to reduce the stuff going into landfill? Isn't that our objective, or are we looking at a venture opportunity here?
Sorry, the last part, or looking at
A venture opportunity with the wood.
Well,
I mean,
also,
is this the end game?
yeah, ultimately, as part of a circular economic strategy, you would want to harvest that wood and then find another end market for another use for it, right? To resell it back into the market.
Insert ourselves in that loop.
You don't have to necessarily.
I don't see this. Nanaimo has a thriving deconstruction industry that we don't have here. Correct? Nanaimo's been doing this for over 20 years.
Yeah, and a big part of that has been the policies around not accepting that material at the landfill. So I think this is kind of emulating that a bit in that it's supporting the clean wood does, as you say, have venture opportunities. It can go to higher and better uses. If it is a half a 2x4, which surprisingly people do chuck into the pile, if it's a half a sheet of plywood, could potentially be pulled out and resold. If it's just, 8-inch end cuts that are really not that useful, it could still be turned into a fuel source potentially.
But I don't understand why we have to insert ourselves in that loop. Why are we, we should encourage the private sector to do that.
Yeah, and so part of how we can encourage them is through our own policies at our facilities, right? So if we're not accepting that clean wood waste and we're incentivizing them to take it to the private sector and we're providing a financial incentive for them to manage it. Most of these facilities, the private facilities within their operating certificates also have a ban on recyclable materials from being landfilled. So if we can demonstrate to the province and declare that clean wood is a recyclable material and that it shouldn't be going into the landfill, then they're going to be incentivized to also continue to sort that material.
Categorically, I'm opposed to the fact that the public has to be doing that. I don't think it's something we need taxpayer dollars to do. Thank you.
All right, and yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of comments that I have. I come from a background of construction, and building. And I do know that we try to recycle stuff. The big challenge is where do we go to actually find a good source of recycled wood? And I'm not interested in terms of recycling wood that is only a few years old. Most of the building industry is interested in recycled wood that is, a few hundred years old. And it's very challenging to find that kind of wood out there, particularly, the old growth cedars, the firs, all of those, the old flooring that was used in homes. And I see that that is the challenge. It's like when you separate the material, we have these junky 2x4s. Where's the real good stuff? And where do we find it? And I can tell you that I've been on the island now for how many years? And there was only one source that I knew of, and that was in Victoria, and that source is gone. What it was a company started up demolishing barns and then reselling the material, and it was beautiful. So again, I see that. I'm not sure if you followed the news. About a month ago, there was a home that was barged into Oyster Bay. So it does show you the potential of moving homes. So that was actually Macmillan's home. I believe it was from Qualicum Beach. Came in on a stormy day, so the winds were blowing, big southeasterly. The barge had no problems coming into Oyster Bay, right across from the Driftwood restaurant. I would estimate that was about a 2,000 square foot house that was put on a barge and trucked across the road, and it's ready now for its foundation. So I would rather see homes being moved as opposed to deconstruction, because I don't view that material that useful in terms of reusing it, because it's quite challenging. A lot of it is in pretty rough shape.
Mhm.
So that's my comments. Thank you.
Oh, absolutely concur with that. We absolutely would love to see more homes relocated, not only to divert material from landfill, but it provides a housing solution. Why are we destroying perfectly good homes when we have a housing crisis? If we have the option to relocate them, use them. So relocation, I'm digressing here a bit, but the practice of relocating homes not only achieves our solid waste objectives, but it achieves multiple objectives at the same time, including providing affordable housing, which is and our climate mandate as well. So,
We got Director Green.
can I?
Thank you. Just to
Yeah.
speak to that, if I may, also deconstruction employs people.
Absolutely.
Deconstruction is a good entry level job for
Yeah.
people that aren't, red ticketed carpenters. And, we don't have the same kind of heritage houses here, maybe outside of Cumberland that you're speaking of, but you're going to be moving Comox boxes with 2x4, 24-inch center construction and old OSB on the sidings, right? It's not going to be the same level of what you're talking about. But yeah, so one question now. Do we have a designated deconstruction company in the Comox Valley, even after all
Yes.
these years of talking about?
Well, they're based in Nanaimo.
Exactly.
But
After all these years of talking about, we still don't have it. So I would look towards incentivizing that industry rather than hiring more public employees. Thank you.
All right, Director Green, thank you. And I'll go to Director Mawhinney. Thanks, Gil, for just rolling with the questions.
Thank you, Chair. And this is sort of related to house deconstruction and rehoming houses, I guess that's what you call it. And I noticed earlier you were talking about how in Victoria, homes that are constructed earlier than 1940 have mandatory deconstruction. Is that because of why? Like I guess in my mind, I'm making an assumption that maybe it's because they were built out of better quality materials, so it's worth saving them. But maybe could you speak to if that year was specifically chosen, and if that year will change over, in the next decade? Will they say anything before 1950 or something like that?
So the primary reason is, as you say, because they've assessed that homes built in that area prior to 1940 have more valuable materials in them that make deconstruction more financially viable. But we have jurisdictions like Burnaby that have a blanket policy in place that all structures must be deconstructed. So it's, we personally don't advocate for that approach. That's why we proposed this assessment model, because you could have homes that were built in 1990 that were made with beautiful materials, you know, much higher quality construction, right? Not spec homes, but really beautiful homes that should be either preserved or at least deconstructed. And so using an assessment-based approach, you get away from the vintage of the home and you focus more on the merits of each home on its own to determine its highest and best use. That's so, and all the policies that are going forward right now, like West Vancouver, Port Moody, Coquitlam, are all looking at that assessment-based approach rather than a vintage house vintage approach. Okay, yeah, I'm okay.
And we got someone online as well, so we'll get you back on track in a second.
Okay.
All right, so it's Director Thiessen. Oops.
Yeah, thanks. I think we almost made the point that it sounded like there was some concern in the room about this division between clean and unclean wood. And so it might be worth just flagging that as a potential avenue for increasing diversion, is that a lot of that might fall in the gray area between those two things. And I've been working in the deconstruction industry on Cortez Island with a friend of mine. We've done about 10 homes, and there's quite a bit of stuff that is painted but can still find a viable use in a new construction, or can even be cleaned up. And like you say, with development of the industry, there's a lot of potential for strategies that can, you know, remove the outer layer of a bigger piece of material and reprocess it down into a smaller piece of material, which is something that I think is happening in these places where we have more valuable materials. It's worth making those investments. It's a lot of reprocessing for finishing wood. And then the other point that I wanted to add to the conversation that I'm hearing around sort of costs, we're looking at deconstructing buildings where there is a financial incentive because the materials are more valuable, and that's very good, but we do always need to keep in mind that there are costs on the other side of landfilling these materials that are borne also by taxpayers. And so whether we put some of those costs of diversion onto home builders or homeowners, you know, that would be a decision as opposed to putting the cost of landfilling and the pollution of methane emissions in particular onto society at large. Thanks.
Okay, I'm gonna move on then to the fifth option that we presented, which is to engage other jurisdictions on cross-regional solutions. This speaks to one of the guiding principles for the new SWMP. Sorry, I'm just gonna get my notes open here again. So basically suggesting that we initiate conversations with local governments, First Nations, and other organizations to identify cross-regional opportunities that would allow for the consolidation of material streams with other regions and provide solutions at scale. And I think that's one of the things, obviously, given the population size and the geography of the Comox and Strathcona regional districts, as well as the other neighboring regional districts, there is a need if you're going to be successful at any of these types of initiatives and secure sufficient volumes of materials to make any type of operation viable, you're going to need to consolidate those activities. And so it behooves everyone to work collaboratively to find those solutions. So some of the kind of low-hanging fruit is a clean wood processing facility, and that was part of my previous. I just realized I didn't actually get to the end of that one. Got a bit distracted, but in the previous option that I was talking to would involve creating some type of expanded processing facility to accept clean wood and to do some type of primary processing on it to make it ready for reuse and resale. So in this case, you know, that kind of a centralized clean wood processing facility or a facility for asphalt shingle recycling would be some of the the initiatives that are, most apparent. I know that the Regional District of Nanaimo has been looking at asphalt shingles as well. I know that that's also something that's been discussed here apparently. So the operational impacts of this would be low. Obviously, it's a consultation exercise at this stage. And then the financial implications would be moderate as well. It really depends on the type of activity that or initiative that you undertake. One of the potential opportunities here is to have CSWM participate in the building material exchange that's been initiated on the island, so affectionately called BMEX. So I want to disclose that my organization, Lighthouse, initiated this program. The building material exchange is a program that connects companies that are generating waste building materials with companies that can use them in their manufacturing processes. So for instance, taking materials off of a construction site and using them in the creation of exterior furniture, landscaping, planter boxes, greenhouses, or indeed types of finishing materials like the stick, the 1x, I think these are 1x2s maybe, or 1x1s that adorn this council chamber, right? These are easy opportunities to use these types of salvage materials in design applications. So BMEX is, the program is meant to divert the materials and keep them in circulation by connecting companies together. And so there's an opportunity for the region to engage in this program. The Regional District of Nanaimo, Cowichan Valley, and the Capital Regional District are already partners on this project. And it would involve about a $25,000 contribution. Through that, you're supporting the matchmaking efforts that happen in this program, educational and awareness activities that are happening to make or to get the construction sector more aware about reuse opportunities, and also an establishment of an online marketplace where companies can transact materials. The regulatory authority for any of these types of initiatives, well, the consultation phase anyway, discussion phase would, there's no regulatory authority required, obviously. Okay. All right. The next option is educational tools and resources. We heard feedback from stakeholders wanting to see more of this type of information sharing. So basically developing a portfolio of materials and resources to educate and support circular best practices amongst the construction sector. The diversion potential of education on its own is relatively low. Education and awareness building provides a foundation for implementation of other more I'll call them substantive initiatives that have a direct correlation to diversion. So it's hard to measure basically what the impacts of education are on practice, but it is an important component. The operational impacts would be moderate. There would be more required of communication staff to engage in the development and dissemination of these materials. And it's important to note that there are quite a few resources already available that the CSWM can draw on, including construction best practice guides that have been developed by the Regional District of Nanaimo and Metro Vancouver. So we estimate about a $50,000 to $60,000 price tag to implement this program. Financial incentives for deconstruction. So this option comes back to Mr. Grant, the comment that the discussion we were having. basically providing a modest financial incentive to contractors to offset the additional cost for deconstruction. When you look back at the numbers I showed you around demolition permits, if we estimate out of what we see 50 to 80 demolitions happening annually, if we saw 20 homes deconstructed as a result of this incentive, we would realize about 1,500 tons of material diverted. So there's a significant potential associated with this incentive. I will also comment that a number of jurisdictions in the states have implemented this type of incentive. And I was just on a webinar yesterday with them, folks like San Antonio, San Francisco, Portland, all of these jurisdictions, and now Seattle have implemented these incentives. And they said this and education were the two main drivers for them to achieve higher diversion rates. So it's a kind of they've seen it as an impactful policy. Operational impacts would be moderate. You need staff, obviously, to implement and administer that incentive with contractors. The contractors would have to provide evidence that they had completed the deconstruction in order to receive the incentive. And so when you look at the financial implications, if we consider 20 to 25 homes being deconstructed, that would translate into about $100,000 to $125,000 in incentives. Okay. And the last option that we have is for consideration is an implementation of a tipping pad and sorting at the Comox Valley Waste Management Center. So basically, again, we already have diversion of clean wood. This would involve expanding that operation to provide a staging area where mixed loads could also be tipped, and either contracted staff or regional staff would sort and extract and harvest the recyclable materials from those mixed loads, primarily the wood. The potential is indicated medium here or moderate. The idea is that if we think back to that waste audit, about 18% of what's going into landfill from mixed loads are recyclable materials. So that's the amount that we could anticipate being harvested from this type of activity. The operational impacts would be high. We've said that if staff were to do it, it would require 2 additional staff and to receive, sort, and track those materials. Alternatively, if it was contracted out, there would be a financial implication either for staff time or for the contracted service. And there would be regulatory changes required, budget approval, and the possible amendment to bylaw 720, which governs tipping fees, because it would impact that.
Gil, can I just interrupt you for a second?
Sorry, I
have
was
a
looking
couple
down.
of questions here. Director McCollum.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for allowing the interruption. My first question around this is for staff, although you may have the answer as well, is that 18% of the mixed, 18% of construction materials that we're receiving are mixed, is how I understand that first bullet.
No, of all the material received as mixed loads, 18% of that material is divertible.
Oh, I see. Okay. So I guess my question is, if we're flagging these loads that have mixed materials that could be diverted and charging that higher $365 fee, is it possible to allocate that higher fee towards the staffing required to enable staff to basically do the work that should have been done before it arrived at the landfill, which is, I think, essentially what we're talking about doing with a tipping pad.
Yeah, I think we wanted to be conservative in presenting this because, as we adjust our own fees to compensate for that, the private sector will do so as well. So, you know, if our fees are significantly higher for doing that sorting on site, and that same service could be provided at private facilities, they might adjust their tipping fees and it might be more desirable to direct material that way. So it's difficult to assume we're going to get that revenue.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. And I guess currently, what is how consistently are we applying that higher tipping fee? I know it was kind of asked already, but I assume it's not 100%.
I'm going to go to Jesse on that one. So the question, Jesse, is how often are we applying the higher tipping fee and flagging loads that are coming in mixed? Do you want to come to the mic just for those online?
Yeah, like how confident are we that we're, you know, if you know, we say had 100 mixed loads coming in, how many of those do you think are getting flagged and charged for that higher fee out of 100?
I don't want to, I'd probably quote you the wrong number, but I could get that for you. Yeah, we track it all. I just don't know it off the top of my head right now. Yes, it's, yeah, I don't know. But as far as I don't know, I guess we would have to look at the pricing for, I don't know what calculation is. If you did it by mixed loads, like sorted it, maybe it would be a slightly different load, like what maybe not the 365 people came in and sorted it. Look at that, but
Yeah, I just mean, you know, are we confident that consistently when a mixed load comes in, they're getting charged the higher fee? That's what I'm wondering.
there, I would say there's probably some that come in that should be coded that would probably be some that get through. Yeah, it's difficult at times too because the load will come in. You know, I was actually thinking about that, just answering that earlier. Is, you know, it might expose itself at the bottom, like something comes up and you don't see it at the time, like the operator might see it, and some contractors, like they'll tell us at the gate. They'll like, that load I covered, like if they put the tarp on it, that load's mixed, and some drivers will let us know right away that they see certain products in it. And so that's pretty good that they've been upfront about it.
Right, and then other times it's noticed at the bin and then that's called up to the scale.
Yeah, then our operator will call it in. Yeah, so that they sort it out, and they'll see like just like yesterday I was out there, you know, percentage of wood or metal. Metal and wood are the ones, cardboard, those are the three that flag the staff to know.
Higher fee.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
All right, we have a question online from Director Davis. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I just had a comment regarding that. I was wondering if there was another way of doing this, like having some sort of compound containers so that they can be separated at the construction site rather than having to deal with it later. I don't know if anybody does that, but I just thought that might be a potential.
Yeah, we actually had our community educator, Lindsay Eason, and her husband, Daryl, who works in the building realm and in the energy area. So they conducted a single pilot. They looked for some participants this summer. And so Daryl worked with a contractor to, you know, try and establish some sorting areas at site. They had experience doing that with their own build. So we're looking to build on that experience, but you know, there were a lot of positives that came out of it, a lot of feedback, a lot more engagement from the staff once those were established, but definitely it's a challenging thing. And we've talked to the hauling sector about that too, about trying to provide, you know, more services so that there isn't just one bin on site. So that's an area we're trying to expand and learn on as well.
But if I could add, you know, the general observation, and it's not just to this region, it's throughout every jurisdiction we've worked with. It is extremely difficult to get sites or contracts to sort on site. If it's an issue of space or labor, or a number of other issues that they raise, there's a deep resistance to sorting on site. Even though it's not necessarily difficult, they don't want to do it. And they'll absorb the cost, whatever the cost is, to divert. I mean, the differential tipping fees here are, I would say, significant, but not as significant as some other jurisdictions, and the cost of managing waste on the Lower Mainland, for instance. And yet you still see contractors, it's just the cost of doing business. when you look at the total cost to build, the waste management budget is insignificant. It's almost negligible. And so they just don't care. And no tipping fee is going to be set high enough to dissuade them or to change their practices. Let alone, like as I said, the considerations of space and labor. There's just so many challenges in that regard.
Okay, so then it's just incumbent on us to make sure that we charge enough that we can do the separation if that's what it comes down to.
Yeah, I mean, you're always going to have those who will do the right thing. There's always the choir, right? You're going to have your 10-20% of contractors that will do it, but they would do it regardless of what, even if you didn't have variable tipping fees, they would still do it because they think it's the right thing to do. And then you have those who might do partial sorting when it benefits them financially, and then you'll have the rest that won't at any cost. So.
If I may, one other quick question, unrelated, gypsum recycling. I notice the costs are high, $275 a ton. I'm assuming that's because it has to be transported all the way to the lower mainland?
Yep, that's right.
Right.
So that's for, yeah, it's unfortunately not able to be lower than disposal because it is an expensive process to manage appropriately.
I see. Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks. I'll go to Director Grieve in a second, but I just wanted to follow up on the idea that there's no amount which would change behavior, and like that's not my understanding of how economics work. Like at a certain point, it does change behavior. Have you managed to identify any jurisdictions where a price has been set that is sufficient to change? Not anywhere. Wow. Okay, that's really remarkable. But but certainly there is the possibility with a higher tipping price for mixed loads, not necessarily to change behavior, but to fund the do some cost recovery on having our staff do the sorting.
Absolutely.
So that would be the reason for increasing the tipping fee, not necessarily that it would change behavior.
Yeah, I mean, it, and I want to say it doesn't change it at all, but it won't change it significantly enough. If you're right,
Yeah.
Some actors will, some of the market will shift, but really, given the environment that we operate in now with the cost of these kinds of projects, it's just the waste management budget is just so negligible. It's not a major consideration.
Such an unusual thing to have something which is not price sensitive at all. And as you said, there seems to be no price that's actually going to change.
Well, the whole
behavior.
concept of price elasticity, like with gasoline, right? Like
Yeah.
people are still going to drive, right? It's just you can't even at $2 or $2.25 a liter, people are still going to drive.
True.
And they're still going to deal with this waste because they're going to build that structure. They're not, and they're just going to absorb the cost.
You're mentioning that it's not necessarily that difficult or in certain circumstances, not that difficult to actually do the separation at site sometimes, but there's a resistance to doing that.
That's right.
Anyway, I know that we're asking a lot
sorry.
of interesting questions, and it's been
Yeah.
we're keeping you for a while. Director Grieve, if you have a quick question, we'll try and move things maybe along a little more quickly.
Thank you. Yes. I guess the same could be said 20 years ago about residential waste recycling. So it is a process. It takes a while.
Mhm.
I spent 20 years in the building supply business, and I knew a lot of contractors firsthand. And out of all the low-hanging fruit I saw in this report, the idea about split bins on site makes a lot more sense than anything else, because what's the 20-foot rule of recycling? If you only have to move 20 feet to recycle something, it'll happen.
Mhm.
Well, the same is true on construction sites. And in a lot of cases, as you know, space is a premium, especially on small lots and that. So just a little anecdotal thing. My son works in the industry, and he said that the drywall bin, they were filling it up, and along came the sheet metal guys, and they dumped all their sheet metal in with the drywall.
Mhm.
So that's an education piece.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
So, I mean, he actually, and it's unsafe to say this, they actually went in and pulled all the metal they could out of it, right? So I think the will is there, but you have to make it easy. So I think split bins is a really good idea, rather than separate hauling, some kind of a thing where we can get it to site already pretty much separated. So low hanging fruit. Thanks.
Yeah, and some, I will acknowledge some haulers are trying to innovate in that way and provide those types of split bins and other types of services.
That's the end of the presentation, right?
Thank you very much for your time.
All right, and thank you so much. I appreciate you allowing us to interrupt for questions. Now we have more.
Thank you. Not so much a question as more of a comment for staff. And this will apply to all of these technical memos that we're receiving. Our next report, the financial plan, we're looking at building a new landfill every 8 to 10 years. So we're going to be spending almost $2 million a year on capital costs for landfills. So it should be a fairly straightforward calculation to figure out our capital cost per ton of landfill. And that will give us a baseline number to compare all of these options that are coming through in the technical memos. So I understand Director Greaves' point that, should we be inserting ourselves in what should be a private market? But maybe we should be, if it makes financial sense and it's coming in. The cost of sorting it is lower than the capital cost of landfilling it. Okay, so yeah, so if staff, when they do bring all of this back in a big package, if we've got a baseline number to compare things to and how each option compares to that number, it will make our decisions much easier to make.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Director Tyrion. And I guess I had one question I wanted. Oh, sorry, Director Thiessen, you can go first, then I'll go ahead.
Thanks so much. Yeah, really appreciating the conversation around all this and for the report. Early in the report, there was the identification that a top priority is waste prevention. And I'm wondering if I could hear some more about strategies to, avoid demolition and avoid renovation as a mitigation strategy for this waste. And particularly, I was curious about the point about 1980, 42% of houses were built prior to 1980s. And I was a bit surprised that the assumption I think is buried in there is that, a 50-year lifespan for buildings is currently expected. And I just think we could probably do better than that. And that kind of thing might be really useful to put at the front end. And one last question to maybe get your reflection on is, building code amendments to increase deconstructibility and reduce waste at that end as well.
Okay, so with regard to the reduction point, the focus on home relocation in the various options is really the approach that we're advocating for here. So the bylaw amendments that would require an assessment that would then require compliance with that assessment with the refundable deposit. So that's 8A and 8B. And 8D, which speaks to the expedited green removal and move on permits. Those are all meant to incentivize home relocation, which reduces the amount of material that's being generated, right? So that's, I hope that addresses that point. Sorry, the second one was?
Building code amendments.
No, there was one before that. The second part.
It was a question about the assumption that houses built prior to 1980
Right.
are expected to be deconstructed shortly.
Yes, so there's no assumption that they would be demolished within 50 years. I would hope these homes would last longer, but we tend to forget the impact of renovations. Renovations, it's estimated to generate about 40% of all CRD material generated. I'm not saying that that's a figure for these this region. It's a more general stat that has come out of other studies, but it's significant. And so homes of that vintage would you'd assume would be going and undergoing some kind of renovation at some point. So that's where that comes, that focuses. And in terms of the building code, I'm not aware of any barriers around or any building code requirements that impact deconstruction. The issue is more about the reuse of salvaged materials, particularly wood. We have this grading requirement currently in both the national and the provincial building codes that require materials to be regraded before they can be used for structural applications. And that there is efforts underway to address that, Washington State and Oregon have removed that requirement in their building codes. We are, what was the thing I was going to say about that? Anyway, that's it is something that is being addressed. So hope that answers that question.
And I'm sorry, Gil does need to leave, so I think if I can address further questions, perhaps we can, or if this is maybe the last one, he's just, we didn't think we would need to say it, but you guys have been so keen.
Director Mawhinney, did you want to, is this a question for Gil then? Or for staff?
It would be fine to just address staff, that's fine. But I do
Okay.
have some comments.
So why don't we just maybe thank you for the presentation, Gil, really appreciate it. It sounds like you do need to leave as it's 11 o'clock and we can continue with staff. So
Okay, thank you
very much. Really appreciate this.
Thank you, Gil.
And Dr. Mooney, if you want to go ahead and ask staff.
Thank you, Chair. I was really happy to read this report, and I was honestly really surprised that the percentage of it's the second biggest sector of what's contributing to the landfill, 42% currently, which is, and I wasn't sure, my first question would be, is that number, does that number include the private landfills like Northwind, which I think we identified that the amount of construction and demolition waste which is going to Northwind is I don't even know, the percentage went from 80 to 1,000 or something tons. So does that 42% number include that private sector contribution, or just?
No, it's just reflective of our own scale data. So the other landfills are construction demolition landfills. So all the material that's going to them is construction demolition. So the big exponential jump for Northwind, one of the big factors for them was they were constructing a new landfill themselves. So once it became permitted, they could receive more materials. And so they were able to open their doors. It also coincided with the changes to the Campbell River Waste Management Center. So we saw a reduction in some loads coming to that facility because, as we mentioned, we don't accept large loads larger than 20 yards at that facility. So the hauler has the choice of coming down to Comox or to choosing to go to Uplands. So the Northwind landfill operates on an appointment basis. It's not like ours that's open, to whoever, whenever. So it's a little bit more difficult. They curate kind of their customers there.
Okay, thank you. I have a couple more questions if I may, Chair.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. I was curious, one thing that I didn't see covered in the report is a solution for dirty wood. And I didn't really know until today what a significant contributor it is, especially when we consider things like greenhouse gases. And we think about 42% of what's being taken to the landfill, and that dirty wood is a much bigger contributor than clean wood. Are there jurisdictions which have processes to divert dirty wood from landfills?
It's not an easy material to manage, and it doesn't have a lot of great options. So I guess we didn't want to give you hope. But I did touch base with Cowichan Valley Regional District. So as you know, they don't have a landfill. So their export costs for managing their waste is significant. Their tip fees are over $200 a ton just for MSW. So with that, they have a little bit more room to, look for diversion opportunities. So they started a pilot for some dirty wood. It's not all dirty wood. It's specific to certain materials. And they have a relationship with GFL. GFL has done enough testing with Lafarge in the Lower Mainland to allow that material to be brought in as an alternative fuel for the cement manufacturing process. So that's the only use that I am aware of at this point, and that is to bring that material to the Lower Mainland to replace coal in the manufacturing of cement. They did indicate that they are doing that at a cost that exceeds their cost to manage waste. So for them, it's a benefit because it, they think it's positive, but for us, it would speak to Director Tyrion's point of understanding, what's the value of putting it in the landfill and is it worthwhile to explore an opportunity like that with a hauler? Takes time and space, and staff have to make sure the right material is going in that pile, and it'd be a bit like drywall, that process where.
Thank you. Thank you. That helps. And then my last comment is just really that, as well, today we are receiving information about the need to increase our requisition to build a reserve. And so we can build another landfill cell. And as Director Tyrion was also talking about, and I just feel like, the cost of living is expanding or increasing exponentially. And there's a lot of people that are struggling to make ends meet. And with construction and demolition waste being the second largest category of materials, I do wonder if regular taxpayers are essentially subsidizing this industry. And I think maybe we'll be able to get more information about that in the future when we do have this roundtable. But I think it's really important to look at that, because I don't think that should be the case. I think that this industry, it's a really significant contributor, and they do need to be covering the costs that they are creating for our service. Thanks.
Thanks, Director Mawhinney, and we'll go to Director Rice.
Thank you, Chair. Just to expand on that, one thing that I would be interested to know is how would it work for the electoral areas that don't have building services? How would we issue demolition permits and things like that?
It would be very difficult, and I don't think that would be the low-hanging fruit we'd go for.
So just to follow up on that, I know that it's challenging for the electoral areas to even think of a building service, but again, if we want to start diverting things, we have to have the tools in place. So maybe that's a good takeaway.
All right, thanks. And I see Director McCollum in the room. Director Thiessen, is your hand still up from before? Or did you have a
No, that's a new hand in response to Director Rice. Just speaking to our community, the competition from a deconstruction perspective is actually people still burning houses down. That's, it's hard to say because we have poor evaluation of it, but it's still, if not more common, it's as common as other strategies for dealing with construction waste. So rather than having a permit to deconstruct, we need to actually enforce existing laws is probably the low-hanging fruit where we're at.
Okay, interesting comment. Thank you for that. And let's see staff taking notes, and I'll go now to Director McCollum.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. One type of material that hasn't really come up in the discussion today is plastic-based construction materials, the vinyl from windows, well, I guess we did touch on carpets a bit, but I mean, flooring, cabinetry, most of the stuff has significant plastics in it. And my question around that is, do we know how much of the construction materials are made up of these kind of more plastic or plastic blended products, and whether or not there are any any circular economy type of recycling initiatives that exist anywhere? I mean, I recognize that in a local market, the answer is clearly not right now. But I'm wondering if they are recycled anywhere in North America, and just how significant that part of the waste is.
Yeah, it is. It's definitely not insignificant, and it's a growing component within homes for sure. what used to be hardwood floors is now plastic flooring. And that's a challenge. There isn't a known market for that plastic vinyl flooring to be recycled at this point. Vinyl is one of the materials that is not allowed within that refuse derived fuel product that's being created to offset coal. So it's the one thing that they're most cautious about, just from an air emissions perspective. So whether it's vinyl siding or vinyl around windows, or even soft vinyl plastic, that's the one that they're most cautious about. So that's the most challenging for sure. I think to Director Thiessen's point earlier, with the building code looking for more tight homes and energy efficient homes, there can be more glues and adhesives, and that can make things more difficult to take apart afterwards. So I think that's the most difficult segment. There's also a lot of plastic wrapping sort of generated through the new home construction that we get questions about. There's styrofoam, there's cardboard boxes, there's plastic wraps, and that's all in the IC&I sector. And so, when they look at what could be diverted during a construction phase, that comes up as a question as well. So, even starting with just providing IC&I options for soft plastics, that could be a potential benefit or opportunity for the sector.
All right, thanks, Sarah. And I just wanted to ask a question myself. I know this is going to be coming back to us, and I appreciate Director Tyrion's suggestion of greater costing. One of the factors I'm wondering if is going to be considered or not is we certainly assess the financial impact and the staffing impact on ourselves for these strategies, but where strategies are to operationalize them are contingent upon municipal contribution of staff and time. I know you're going to be consulting with the municipalities, but is that going to be a factor that's used to assess the viability of these strategies? Because it may be low cost and low impact for us, but if it is a significant cost and impact for municipalities, the viability is I think that's something we need to take into account in terms of the viability. So is that a factor that will be addressed?
I think through those stakeholder engagements, it'd be important to understand if the municipalities see a willingness. If they're not willing to commit, then it's not necessarily a viable option to pursue. So it might come through that part of the conversation more than anything. I think we don't want to muddy the water with the financial or resource implications, because if you go beyond that scope that we've set, it can be very challenging to measure, because municipalities wouldn't be the only impacted third party. In as we go through each of the strategies, we'd have to then look at private sector implications and that as well. So I think we do have to be cognizant that the effectiveness of the strategies are contingent on that participation. So if it doesn't seem like it's able, and that was something Gil and I discussed, was a lot of these examples of strategies when it comes to the first three that he presented have all been enacted at the municipal level. So there wasn't an example of a regional district imposing these upon municipalities that we could refer to, and so that precedent hasn't been set. So it really does require those municipalities to be partners in this, and if they're unable, for their own resource implication reasons, then those strategies won't be successful. But
okay, and so just I guess a difference between consultation and referral. What sort of what type of contact or consultation with municipalities you're envisaging there? And if they were to say this is beyond the scope of what we're able or willing to do.
Yeah, I think meeting with the building and planning departments, and understanding for them those implications and bringing that information back as part of the discussion of the strategies. I noted at the top of my page here that, in that list of stakeholders that was missing. So I think, just the emphasis that those first three strategies that were presented would have on those municipal staff, I think it's important that we bring that perspective into the memo as well.
Okay, I think that's really integral to assessing what these are viable or not, and they have to be really fulsome discussions. Okay, thanks very much. We've got one more speaker, and then we'll move on to the next item.
Yeah, sorry. to chime in again. Just a quick comment on the consultation with building staff, especially in the context of the Comox Valley. Would the dialogue be facilitated as a group? Because I mean, a lot of this makes a lot more sense if there's some cohesion between the three municipalities in terms of actions. And so I wonder if it would make sense to do something that's more like you know, the elected official forums that we sometimes do as a group on a certain topic and get, you know, field it to the group rather than having separate conversations with staff around the service. So just something to think about.
Thanks. I'll yeah, speak with James about that.
All right, and after all that, it's just proceed. So anyone opposed to receipt? Thank you so much, Sarah, and appreciation obviously expressed to Gil previously. All right, so we're gonna move on to the next item. This is likely to be brief. It's just the financial plan. So that's for receipt, and I'll pass that over to our CAO. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So Mark Rutten, our General Manager of Engineering Services, will be kicking off the presentation of the financial plan. He'll be supported by Jesse Lee, Manager of CSWM Operations, and Lucy Wacharek, Chief Financial Officer, and Kelly Broughton, also our Manager of Financial Planning. So we have a full team here to support, and Mark, I'll turn that over to you.
Great, thank you. Through the CEO and through the chair. So yeah, I wish I could say that this is going to be brief, but it probably won't be. But I will try to keep it moving along and not belabor. And if there's questions, we've definitely got the team here that can support any questions that come up. James has already introduced the team here, so I won't redo that. This PowerPoint provides a thorough overview of the budget and has been provided as part of your agenda package. So I'm hoping that some of you have had a chance to already look through it. Your package also includes the detailed budget pages that you've seen in the past and a couple of staff reports. But we'll use the PowerPoint here to walk through the financial plan. So this first slide here just really lets you know that the service was established in '97 by bylaw 1822. It's been amended once. The amendment was nothing major, just sorting out electoral areas. The service name is Comox Strathcona Waste Management, and the participants are the two regional districts. This slide shows the extents of the service area. There's 8 municipalities, 8 electoral areas included in the service. There are several remote areas serviced, which creates a lot of challenges for the services, or some challenges for the service. The service is governed by the Comox Strathcona Waste Management Board, which is essentially the two regional districts boards coming together to manage this service and the large service area. Service manages over 65,000 tons of waste and recycled material annually and oversees a number of diversion and education programs. Oops, sorry. This slide here shows some of the different main components of the service. So on the left-hand side, we're highlighting a single regional landfill located in Cumberland, 2 large waste management centers, one in Cumberland, one in Campbell River, that are kind of full service centers for those larger municipal areas. A regional organics facility located in Campbell River, 3 small historical landfills that continue to operate but are slated for closure. 2 small recycling depots on Quadra and Oyster River that are slowly being expanded and upgraded to provide greater service. And finally, 6 full service recycling depots and transfer stations at Hornby, Cortez, Gold River, Tassus, Savalis, and Saywar. On the right-hand side, we've included some work that we're doing now and plan to do in the future to better show the lines of business that are included in this service. So we'll be working to demonstrate the sort of costs in a bit of a different way. along the lines of administration, annual debt, capital upgrades, the different components of diversion, education, landfill disposal, transfer stations, and unified transportation. And I think by creating these lines of business, it'll be easier to demonstrate the benefits and opportunities for the service. So this slide here is it's just a single metric that we're showing here, but we do plan to produce some additional metrics for the service that will also help to inform those opportunities for the future. This one here is one that you may have seen before. It's a metric of our disposal rate compared to the rest of the province. You can see kind of where we fit in there, sort of in the middle. Our rate is 499 kilograms per capita, just above the average in BC of 478, but well above the ministry target of 350. So there's a lot of information on this slide. I won't go through all of it, but just want to touch on a few highlights. There are some big challenges facing this service. And some of those are the amount of waste that's going into the landfill. So there's a lot of opportunity to reduce waste going to the landfill. Sarah has presented many of those opportunities as part of the solid waste management planning work, including today where there was a large discussion on construction and demolition material. Our traffic counts are very high. They've been going up steadily for the last several years. There's a lot of people that attend the landfill every day. Just at Comox Valley, we can have 500-600 customers a day. So when you think of that over a month or over a year, there's tens of thousands of people that are traveling to the landfill and being serviced there, or tens of thousands of visits. So that creates challenges in terms of staff requirements to attend all those customers. And it creates issues for the customers where they can get frustrated at the lineups that that can be in place at the scale or in other parts of the site. There's regulatory requirements. They're always increasing. They never go down, and they have an impact on the service. Disaster preparedness is something that's kind of emerging, but becoming a bigger part of the conversation. And you can see around the world the amount of debris that can be produced during a natural disaster or any kind of a disaster. And that debris needs to be dealt with. And it often ends up at landfills, and it can overwhelm the facility in a really short period of time. So it's being prepared for that kind of thing and having some plans in place. And then education, kind of getting your message out in today's world is a challenge. There's a lot of information coming at people all the time. But it's not all challenges. On the right-hand side, we showed some opportunities. Speaking of education, it can be improved and enforcement can be improved. There's emerging strategies for achieving higher waste compaction rates that can help save landfill airspace. Landfill gas wells, which we talked about a lot at the last meeting. There's new technology for auto tuning, which can help reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and service levels can be optimized. So moving on to some of the accomplishments from 2024, and these are not all of them, but we're just highlighting some here. We have, even though there's still a lot of opportunity on the greenhouse gas reduction side, we have achieved some big successes here also. We've implemented a regional organics facility. It's full first year of operation in 2024. The Campbell River Flare was commissioned, and we're getting that operating a lot more steadily now. And the board has endorsed some improvements for next year. And we've also done drone methane detection at both landfills, I believe, but mainly at Comox Valley. Solid waste management plan work is well underway. A lot of initiatives been brought forward for consideration, and that process is providing the opportunity for some major improvements in the future. And then education, we continue to try to educate the community on diversion and reducing waste to the landfill. And we offered a couple of pretty hands-on experiences this past year in terms of landfill tours and organics tours. So now getting into the budget a little bit more here. So this slide is showing the results of some third quarter variance analysis that was completed. So this is, we've always done a bit of variance analysis, but this year took a much deeper dive. Jarrett worked on kind of a deep dive with Jesse into where we thought we would be at the end of the year. So this particular slide shows a projection of where revenue and spending will be at the end of the year. So it's our estimation at this point in time where we're going to end up. So there's kind of been a line by line analysis. We're comparing the approved budget to where we think we'll be at the end of the year, and then producing a variance amount in the final column on this sheet. As you can see, we're projecting a $2.2 million surplus for the service. And that amounts to about 11% of the total budget, which is quite large. But I just want to speak to what's driving this surplus and make sure that there's a good understanding of the key drivers here. So almost 600,000 of the surplus is from 2023 surplus that was higher than budgeted, higher than anticipated. 686,000 is from higher than expected revenue. So this is out of our control. More waste came to the landfill than we estimated, and so it's produced additional revenue that we didn't expect. But it could have been the other way. It could have been less waste. It could have been less revenue. So just, you know, that's something that is not fully in our control. And then the 838,000 of this is from underspending. So it's items in the budget where we didn't spend the full amount that we'd put into the budget. You know, I think one of the most important takeaways from this slide regarding the surplus is that it cannot be relied on. And, you know, we shouldn't be thinking of this surplus as reliable revenue for the service. It is expected to be around 2 million this year, but it could have easily been, you know, a lot less. So just a quick slide here on strategic priorities. So these initiatives that we've highlighted here, these are coming from the 2012 Solid Waste Management Plan. And 2 out of the 3, I think, have, you know, we're pretty much ready to kind of tick them off and say that we've done them, although there's always lots of optimization to do. But in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, we've implemented organics. We've closed and capped our 2 largest historical landfills and are collecting and flaring the landfill gas. We are now progressively closing our active landfill and installing new wells as we fill. We're optimizing our landfill wells, so that's the work that will continue, and we'll continue to draw out more and more methane. And we're working with partners for beneficial reuse. So we've done a lot of work on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. I know it's still a big emitter, but there has been a lot done. And environmental responsibility. So the final objective there, we have virtually eliminated our landfill impacts to groundwater. So by closing those 2 large landfills, there's no longer groundwater impacts from those landfills, at least not from rain passing through them. And then our new landfill is fully engineered with a full bottom liner, leachate capture and treatment. So there's been big improvements on the environmental side in this service, you know, since that 2012 plan. And then the first one there, minimize waste generation. You know, I think we have a long ways to go there still, and that's, as you know, has been a big focus of the solid waste management plan work that Sarah's leading, and that has been presented at many meetings. In 2025, we have a pretty full work plan, and just go through some of the items here. So continuing our work on the solid waste management plan, We'll be working, one of our initiatives this coming years, we're going to be trialing a project where we shred waste. So we're shredding it prior to compacting it and then compacting to try to maximize the airspace. Implementing new scale software in early 2026. That's going to significantly improve our data collection and support diversion programs. Planning for disasters, like I mentioned, being prepared for a large natural disaster that could produce a lot of debris in a short period of time. Optimizing our landfill wells, landfill gas wells, finalizing the project on Quadra Island, which has taken us quite a while to implement to enhance their recycling depot. Expanding organics. So we are looking to expand organics, although this will be in small steps, but we do have a little bit of extra capacity at the facility, and there's opportunities within multifamily and ICI, but also in the residential sector too. And the final project that we've listed here is a need for office space at the Waste Management Center, Comox Valley. Our facilities there have evolved over time, and they're kind of ad hoc, where we've just created space sort of as required for a few people at a time, and it's just no longer functioning as a very efficient space. So we have included some funds in the budget to enhance the space for staff there. Moving to human resources. So at the top of this slide, the 30.93 is our full-time equivalent value in 2024. The proposed budget includes additional staff, and I'll just walk through each of the items listed there. Number one is a full-time wastewater operator that's allocated 50% of the time towards landfill gas and 50% of the time towards leachate treatment. It's a wastewater operator because those two facilities, the landfill gas facilities and the leachate treatment plant, they're operated by our certified wastewater operators from the wastewater department. We've also included a 0.33 of a full-time equivalent site safety coordinator. So our site safety performance at the landfill and within our water and sewer departments will benefit from a full-time safety coordinator. So the solid waste service will fund 1/3 of this position. And this position, is focused on site safety. So these sites are much more operational in nature. They have different risks than, say, the office staff or rec staff sites. And this position will be focused on those more industrial kind of risks, and that's that side of the safety program. It was 0.5 of a full-time financial planning analyst. So this, as you know, this is a large service. There's a lot of money that flows through this service year over year. And there's a big benefit to completing more financial analysis and really drilling into those places where we can find efficiencies, and that's the rationale for this position. And then the final ask on the human resource side in the proposed budget is 0.75 of an FTE. This is for summer relief. So in the summer, we're having peak days with more customers than we can handle. And there are times when we need to put 2 attendants in the scale because we need attendants bringing people in and weighing them out at the same time, or the lineups will just get too large. And we need more people on the ground at the front end of the landfill, just helping with recycling and getting the materials to the right bins. So we're asking for, it's 2 people working part-time in the summer to handle those peak loads. So that turns out to be 0.75 of an FTE. So the total HR requested increase in the proposed budget is 1.95 full-time equivalents. A few more slides here before I turn it over to Lucy and her team, just to walk through the expenses. So the expenses are broken down on the next four slides. This first one here shows the overall service. And this service is broken down into 4 different functions. The first one is the landfilling operations and maintenance, and this is really the bulk of the service. But then we've also broken out landfill gas, leachate treatment, and organics. I'll go through each one separately here. So this is the main part of the service, and I'll just touch on some of the, so this slide here shows the 2024 budget on the most left column of numbers, the proposed budget for 25, and then shows the increase. So you can kind of focus into which lines are driving an increase or a decrease. So support services has seen an increase in 2025. This is mainly driven by extensive capital spending over the past 5 years. So the amount of capital spent within a service is one of the factors considered in support services. And as a service spends a lot of capital, that creates a demand on accounting department, the purchasing department, all of the departments that are within support services, and so that drives an increase. This should stay steady or reduce as capital spending drops for the next several years. Grants to other organizations have seen a decrease for 2025 as we completed the paving along Bevan Road. So that number should stay the same at 714 for future years, or thereabouts. The plan includes a reduction in reserve contributions. This is an issue for the service, and it's going to be discussed later in the presentation in a bit more thoroughly, but you can see a reduction there. And minor capital is reduced for 2025. However, this line does change significantly from year to year, depending on asset replacements that are included for that particular year. The next service is called post landfill closure. It's not a service, it's a sub function of the solid waste service. Post landfill closure, it's really the landfill gas system. And you can see an increase in personnel costs, which we just talked about, the 0.5 FTE, and otherwise costs are relatively stable here. The leachate treatment sub-function. Also here you can see an increase in personnel costs for the additional 0.5 FTE. And also of note is a significant increase in minor capital. So this treatment plant is getting to be 8 or 9 years old now. And so we're seeing a little more of a maintenance requirement than in the past. And so that's driving some minor capital increases. And then regional organics. The biggest change here is our contract cost for facility operations. So the first kind of year and a half of operations, we used our contractor that operates the Campbell River Waste Management Center to also operate our organics facility. And in 2025, sorry, just this year in 2024, we went out for a competitive process to hire a contractor for a longer term. That process has just completed and has resulted in just slightly, well, not slightly, but some increased cost on the contractor side. But we just completed that competitive process and these rates will be secured for the next while. You can also see here that our fuel and lubricant costs have increased for 2025. So that's the expense side of the budget. And on the revenue side, we're comparing to the approved revenue in 2024. So again, it's kind of laid out the same way. 2024 revenue request is shown there in the approved budget, and then 2025, the proposed budget. But even though the overall requested revenue is lower at 19 million compared to 19.6, we are proposing a tax increase, so a tax requisition increase of $1 million. And this is required to adequately fund reserve contributions, which are necessary to avoid excessive debt and debt costs in the future. which we'll talk about later in the presentation. Another big change here, or something to note, is that the 2025 proposed budget does not include prior year surplus. So you can see that line is blank below. Earlier in the presentation, I talked about the fact that there will be a surplus, but it has not been included here. And this is a much more prudent approach in terms of budgeting. And we are recommending to the board that we don't rely on that surplus as part of our revenue, and that we budget for the expenses that we think we need, and not rely on that surplus. This is a graph that shows the revenue requirements over the next 5 years. So you can see, it's hard to see. It's a little bit hard to see on this graph, but it's the blue bar that is increasing. The other bars near the top are those smaller services like landfill, smaller sub-functions, landfill gas, leachate, that are not really increasing. They're fairly steady over time. But what is increasing is the blue bar, which is the main landfill function. And what's driving that increase is the contribution to reserves. So we are recommending that we increase our reserve contributions. We get ourselves in a position where we don't need to take on a lot of future debt for the next landfill expansion that happens in 2031. But that will require revenue increases. Okay, thank you. Just a couple more for me. We're just shifting to capital spending here. This graph shows the 10-year capital plan. It's a really helpful graph, and you can see that our capital spending is around 2 million a year. That's just to keep up with our minor capital projects and our equipment, major equipment replacements. This service uses a lot of heavy equipment, and it's expensive. We have to keep maintaining it, replacing it from year to year. But then you see these very large expenses as we construct cell 3. So cell 3 is planned for 2030 and 2031. And it's these large projects like landfill expansion that are driving the need for higher reserve contributions, so that we're in a position where we don't have to take on such a large amount of debt. I'll go through these next two quickly here. So this is the capital plan in numbers, but basically what that bar graph just showed. So these are the details of the different projects that are layered into each of the years. Of note here are landfill closures that are happening in Zabalis, Tassus, and Gold River. And also machinery, which can make up a large part of this budget. So that's showing 25 to 29. This one is showing 2030 to 2034. And when doing capital planning, it is important to do it over the long term, so that you do see those large projects coming in the future, and that you can plan for them. This one's quite hard to see, so I apologize for that, but I wanted to include this just to show the benefit of the positive benefit of diversion. So if we improve diversion from 50% to 70%, can defer the construction of cell 3 by 5 years. And that can make a big difference. So that hasn't been layered into the plan. We're planning for cell 3 in 2031, but this is just to highlight that the benefits of diversion, the benefits of securing that airspace for as long as we can, will help us have the time to save the money that we need for future expansion. So that's it for me. I'm now going to turn it over to Lucy and her staff to take us through the fiscal sustainability part of the budget.
Thank you. Through the chair. As Mark has mentioned, there's a lot of information that's been provided to you up front, and we've just got a few areas that are highlighted here. We'll try to just get through that as quickly as we can and give time for questions. And we're sitting here probably between yourselves and lunch, so we'll just try to keep moving, okay? It's great. Next slide, please. Where do we? Thank you so much. Okay. So as we transition into further financial factors, we wanted to begin the section by first touching on fiscal sustainability and elements of policy. CSWM currently operates under an existing financial policy. Work to update and incorporate greater depth will be conducted and aligned with the completion of your new solid waste management plan. So staff will continue with the development of draft policy related to reserves and debt. And on this slide here is just some key words around recommended elements that you typically see in these types of policies. So as well, incorporated within funding model, detailed principles for setting taxation, tipping, and other user fee revenue will be proposed. Set to come to this board in early 2025 is your asset management policy that will be specifically aligned to solid waste management operations. The developed principles across these key areas will work in an integral fashion while conducting critical rate review work and setting those strategies for funding to the future. The future adoption of additional policy will bring improved decision-making aligned to board direction and your strategy, and while at the same time just ensuring that we have in place best practice financial measures are all incorporated as well. The proposed budget has been developed through the alignment to the principles that are in your existing policy and additional staff development work in these key areas. A risk for sharp increase in future debt and low reserves, as highlighted within the delivery of the 2024 budget, has been of primary focus. Staff see a short window to raise funds necessary to avoid costly debt servicing to the future. I'll pass things over to Kelly now, who'll just take you through current and projected conditions of reserve debts and how this translates into staff's recommendations within this proposed budget.
Thanks, Lucy. Long-term debt. In 2014, the Comox Strathcona Waste Management Board developed a debt funding strategy for 3 major capital projects for the Campbell River and Comox Valley historic landfill closures and the construction of a new engineered landfill at the Comox Valley site. The strategy included a loan authorization bylaw of $45 million, $45,295. $295,000 for all 3 of the projects combined. As the projects were completed, long-term debentures were entered into, the first of which was in 2020, then 2021, and the last in 2022. All 3 are for 20-year terms for a combined total of just under $36 million. They have a debt servicing requirement of just over $2.7 million per year. Debt levels and debt servicing requirements are projected to remain stable through 2030. In 2030, the new landfill cell is estimated to add approximately $6.2 million to the existing debt and will add $514,000 to the annual debt servicing requirements for a 20-year term. The reserves. So this service has 4 reserves, and they all need some foundational support as they are underfunded and don't meet the best practices for fiscal sustainability. During 2025, the board will have the opportunity to begin reviewing the reserve policies for the operating, capital, and the closure reserves and to develop a funding strategy. Although the reserve policy has not been fully developed, best practices recommend that the optimal level for an operational reserve should have a minimum of 3 months of operational working capital available. For the Comox Strathcona Waste Management Service, that minimum should be set at approximately $3.7 million. This minimum reduces the risk of any cash flow issues that could result from sudden drops in revenue, such as reduced tipping fees or a major insurance claim or legal issue. Operating reserves are readily accessed and can be repurposed as necessary. A well-funded operating reserve can be used to help alleviate future spikes in requisition amounts by providing a stable source of funds to pull from and to help provide some rate smoothing. As you can see from the table on the screen, this reserve will not reach that recommended level by the end of the 5-year plan. Indeed, during 2030, it is planned to pull $1.2 million from this reserve to help fund the Cell 3 project. And at the end of 2034, the balance is projected to be just over 1.4 million, which is almost 2.3 million less than the benchmark identified. Capital Works Reserve. The Capital Works Reserves are specific to the purchase of physical assets or construction of future infrastructure and asset management, including the renewal and replacement. They are established through a bylaw for a specific project and cannot be repurposed like an operating reserve. Coming into 2024, the Capital Works Reserve balance is below what is recommended for financial best practices. The reserve balance should be able to fully fund the first 3 years of planned capital and a minimum of 50% of the remaining 7. Most policies also suggest carrying a buffer of the estimated replacement value of the service assets. The Comox Strathcona Waste Management Service currently has assets with a net book value of just over 31 million. During 2025, the optimal balance for the capital reserve will be included in the forthcoming policy, as will the services asset management plan. Over the next 10-year planning cycle, the capital plan is projected to be just over 34 million, with almost 20 million dollars of the projects relating to capital renewal and infrastructure construction. With the exception of 2025, the contributions to the Capital Works Reserve have been slowly increased to position the reserve balance within the minimum range. Increasing the reserve contributions with a phased approach builds the reserve from a dangerously low balance of 4.3 million in 2025 to a dip in 2031 and building back up to a reasonable 17 million at the end of 2034. As you can see, even planning the increases to be manageable and reasonable, the Cell 3 project will still require an additional 6.2 million dollars in debt. However, the reserve is able to fund 63% of this project, which is a significant improvement to how Cell 3 was planned in the 2024 financial plan. Our analysis shows that if the requisition is not raised to the levels shown in the proposed plan, the Comox Strathcona Waste Management Service will drain the reserves by the end of 2030. The Engineered Landfill Reserve. This reserve was established to help fund the engineered landfill at the Comox Valley Waste Management site. Once the cell was built, this reserve has become somewhat redundant. Staff would like to collapse this reserve into the Capital Works Reserve, as both reserves can be used for the purpose of constructing landfill infrastructure. During the 2025 reserve policy discussion, staff will bring forward a recommendation to consolidate the reserves. The Landfill Closure Reserve. Although the Landfill Closure Reserve is projected to keep up with the planned closures over the next 10 years, this reserve, like others, needs to have some additional attention. Post-closure care and projected expenditures are estimated to continue for 30 years after the final closure of the landfill. The current contributions of $600,000 annually are likely not enough to fully fund the closure costs beyond the 2034 horizon. Funding sources. The taxation part. The requisition is proposed to increase by $1 million in 2025 and a further $2 million by 2029. This increase is necessary to stabilize the reserve funding, which in turn will reduce the need for increased debt and build elasticity in the service to absorb unexpected events. A $1 million increase when it's averaged between all communities is $13.90. So that's based on a house valued at $800,000. The high is in Area C of $26.83, and the low is in Zabalas of $2.88. This next slide just shows the taxation implications to the typical household, and this is based on the average assessed residential value by the area as provided by BC Assessment in March of 2024. We've shown it across at what it was for 2024 at 5 million, 2025 at the proposed 6 million, and then building up for 7 and 8 million. This side is the total tax requisition by participants. So this is what we will be invoicing the province for the rural areas and the municipal areas for their proportional share of the tax requisition. Thank you, and I will turn the presentation back over to Lucy for final thoughts.
Thanks, Kelly. Thanks. So staff's intent through the proposed budget is twofold. First, to put Comox Strathcona Waste Management in the best position possible to be ready for the direction forthcoming from the updated solid waste management plan. And secondly, to avoid the risk of overextending the use of debt by putting in place a proactive plan to avoid reserve shortfalls and service unaffordability. Through the board's deliberation of this proposed budget, staff request your feedback and direction with the 2025 financial plan, and to the best of currently known data and assumptions, proactive measures are recommended to ensure the corporation has the financing to deliver on the upcoming direction for enhanced measures for environmental protection and effective waste management services. This proposed budget was a little bit difficult to bring together. As I still today sit and reflect on it, feels that we're in this transitional period at this moment. So you see us drawing assumptions and setting recommendations through this proposed budget that are based on best practice and whatnot. As we go through this coming year, and as a board, you get to consider all of these elements. That'll be the place when it'll come together from a board direction. There's options. We've noted and identified that there's a need for increased funding. And then as we work through your direction in this coming year and build those policies, then the how and where that'll come from will become more refined. The board may want to consider the following options or combinations thereof. Endorse this proposed budget. Plan will look to increase the taxation in 2025, tipping fees in the year following. This will give us a better reserve position and reduce the amount of debt needed for the major capital build to the future, like we've identified. And secondly, the board can direct staff to make changes to the proposed budget, and this may look like increasing revenues at different rates or decreasing initiatives, service levels. And lastly, for consideration, funding sources can remain the same. And in this case, there likely would be a need to come back and consider existing service levels. And we'd recommend carefully considering adding additional services or service levels to the future. This is your recommendation as it is in the plan, and we're happy to answer any questions, discussions, etc.
All right, thanks very much, Lucy. I'm going to open the floor for questions. And I see Director Grieve kicking it off.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And referring to Mark's presentation, we talked about some post-disaster planning. I remember when we did the first iteration of the master agreement, we discussed mass carcass disposal for livestock, because there is quite a lot of livestock in Area C. I'm just wondering, is that still part of the mitigation plan for a disaster, potential disaster?
Yes, I think that would be considered as part of that work. It's a disaster, and even now we do, we just took some waste from avian flu outbreak, birds that had to be destroyed. And so, for those individual events that are smaller like that, we work with the province, get the permission that we need, and then, we're allowed to take that material and dispose of it. But for a much larger incident, yeah, that would be included in the kind of disaster planning work that we're proposing.
All right, thank you. We're going to go to a couple of questions online. I'll go first to Director Harbour.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, on the budget, thank you for the comprehensive presentation. But and I do support bringing up to par the operating reserve so that you do have that 3 months. My concern is I think there's prudent and there's over prudent in regards to the capital reserve and the next cell 3, especially after hearing our head of engineering talk about the benefit of trying to push that opening to 5 years later if we succeed in diversion of materials, which we need to do. Everybody agrees on this board, like that's how we reduce the cost of the service. So for me to start putting out large amount of reserves towards cell 3 is counter to, I think, what should be the focus of this board, which is to ensure that we invest in the diversion activities and delay cell 3. And further to that, I don't know about other board members, but for area A, which I represent in the district, this decision today would lead to yet another 15% tax increase to residents year over year. And our region has just decided to make huge investment in recreation and otherwise. And we're still coming out of this inflationary period. I hear from residents they're feeling stretched. And I was all heartened when I saw that we had a small operating saving coming up. And then I was really distraught when I saw that in order to build this reserve, we needed that kind of level of tax increase. So I would actually prefer, instead of $1 million, if it could be like 300,000 or something, that, 15% tax increase used to be like a big deal. And so I think if it was 5% or something like that, it would be more, and also that it aligns better with our intent to favor diversion over like continuing to build these cells every 8 years. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Director Arbor. I'll take one more from online, Director Wally, and then we'll go back to the room.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I recall, at a previous roundtable that we had, I had thought that the intent of the board was to slowly increase tipping fees to reduce requisition. And if I recall correctly, I think at that time it was equated that $16 in tipping fees was equivalent to $1 million in requisition. So my question to staff is, are we moving in that direction of increasing tipping fees to reduce taxation?
Sorry, Mark, did you want to go first or?
Yeah, I think what we're doing is for the capital side of the budget, so for those fixed costs in terms of debt and capital funding, we are looking to taxation to fund those parts of the budget. So the tipping fees are variable, and they depend on the amount of waste, and they kind of fund those more variable components of the budget. Whereas on the capital side and the debt costs associated with capital, those are highly fixed and repeat over a long period of time. And so we are definitely looking to taxation to find that kind of fixed funding for that side of the budget. So yeah, we are still definitely looking at tipping fees and how they can be used, but not just looking at those to increase the budget.
If I might just make one quick comment, Mr. Chair, my preference would be to increase fairly significantly the tipping fees, and through tipping fees build up an adequate reserve to cover some of those capital costs over time, rather than use requisition. I think the end result would be the same, and it would lessen the taxes on a lot of people. And in that way, it would be more of a user pay type of system, where those who deposit a lot of refuse would pay more than those who don't. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Director Wally. And if I remember correctly, I think Director Wells has another place that he's going shortly, so maybe I'll just go to you quickly online and we'll come to the room.
Thanks very much, Chair. Yeah, I do have to race off about 5 minutes ago. So yeah, I mean, on that tipping fee thing, I guess, you know, to follow up on that, you know, one of the things that has been flagged as a challenge around that is leakage, as you know, maybe some of that solid waste goes to other jurisdictions. So I also feel that the tipping fee increases is a benefit, I get the staff perspective that it's maybe not as consistent as taxation, but you know, if we're looking at all of the increase in taxation that's coming, it's going to be pretty significant, and so really one of my questions has to go to the leakage side. I recall asking in the past whether or not our waste management board is talking to the other ones on Vancouver Island to see if there's, you know, not necessarily that we're moving in lockstep, but that, you know, we're doing things in a way that we're aware of what those other regional districts are. So if leakage happens, we're paying more attention to it.
Thanks. I just, if I could, just wanted to add a couple of comments to the user fee conversation, and we've touched on many aspects of user fee. And if I could, it's all a piece of your funding model. So all of all this that you've expressed, where we all know there's a portion of funding that comes from taxation, a portion that comes from user fees. In your current, all of those elements, as we continue that work in that comprehensive rate review that we'll do once we feed in a number of factors from this board and direction from this board on what you see as coming from taxation, what you see as coming from user fees, how you want the different classes of customers and different programs out there, what kind of recoveries you want of those, that's what'll come into the model. I guess overall, what I would say, how critical it is for a utility, as Mark has mentioned, that you have this combination of fixed revenue coming in and variable revenue. So in my experience, you need to be very careful with that. Because as we're saying, one of our biggest goals is diversion, and you can see how that tipping fee revenue is, how it's variable, and it can go up, as we've seen in our results of our projections to year end for 2024, but that also can dip the other way very quickly. And then you have an issue from being able to fund your operation. So we'd like to try to, so it's a balance between the two, and we'll certainly consider that as we go. Your plan is currently built on some increases in tipping fees to the future. And we've noted in there, I hope that was noticed, that for 2025, there is no increase because those rates have already been set by this board by bylaw. But as you go to 2026, they're increased somewhat, and then further on. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Lizzie. And go to questions.
Sorry, if I could, and Mark, can you help? Sorry, can you comment a little bit on the connection with the other regional districts on the island? I think that was part of Director Wells's question on the other regional districts.
Yeah, so we do, you know, we're always communicating with the other regional districts. We're definitely not setting rates in lockstep with them, but we do review what their rates are, and you know, look to try to ensure that there's not leakage happening between regional districts. And we've brought some of those analysis to the board from time to time that shows how the rates vary across Vancouver Island and the Sunshine Coast, and they are relatively consistent, except for a few that are much higher than us.
And if I could just ask one little subsequent or maybe a comment.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. One of the things that I've seen in the past is how our tipping fees relate to other ones, but one of the metrics that I saw today is that comparison of taxation versus tipping fee. And it'd be maybe good to see how that relates to other regional districts as well. I think I saw something 65%-ish in one of the slides, I think, but that data, again, to see how we compare with some of the other regional districts might be good as well. And maybe it's already been done, but I don't recall that metric in the past.
Right, thanks. Director Wells, and I'll go back in the room to Director Tyrion.
Thank you, Chair. Just want to comment on some of the things Director Arbor brought up. Personally, I think that we need to, that these increases are absolutely necessary. As much as we want to divert waste, and that's our primary goal, we are not going to be reducing it enough by 2031 that we are not going to be building this new cell. The surplus that we saw in the budget is because more people are bringing more stuff to the landfill. And that's why we have increased revenues, is because there is more stuff. So rather than diverting waste, it's actually increasing. I realize that this bottom line number of 15 to 20% tax increase is looks large, but really for a house in electoral area A or in Cumberland, it's about $2 a month in the first year, and then a little bit more than that in subsequent years. So the actual dollar figures are not that large. And we need to be positioning ourselves so that we're not taking on a huge amount of debt once we get around to 2031. The conversation, should this be more paid by users and increasing the tipping fees? Yes, I think so. I think Director McCollum, or actually it was Director Mulvaney, brought up that we are subsidizing the construction and demolition industries because we are passing on these fees as requisitions rather than tipping fees. So yes, probably the balance should move more that way. And this budget may not actually even be going far enough. As we look at this solid waste management plan that is coming up in the next couple of years, and we're looking at all these ways to try and divert waste, they all come with a cost. And none of those costs are being factored into this budget at this time. So this may not even be going for far enough.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Director Tyrion, and Director McCollum, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, from the presentation as it's been outlined, I would certainly concur that our reserves are not trending in a way that's adequate for our medium and long-term capital plans. So I'm in agreement that we do need to look at increasing them. But I would say that how we fund our reserves is a policy decision for the board. And although it may be the preference of staff that we use taxation in order to do that, it is ultimately our decision on how we proportionally do that. And I do recall when we did the roundtable that there was a real preference to funding the service on the polluter pay model, which is more tipping fees than taxation. Although I do recognize that, of course, we do need that basis. I'm not in disagreement with having a taxation proportion, but the budget as it's outlined shows a 20% increase in taxation, and we're looking at a tipping fee revenue projection of 3%. So to me, that's just not very much in alignment with where we'd like to see things go. So I guess what I would, and furthermore, in order to conservatively budget, we have to keep the budgeted tipping fees in a conservative way so that we're not over planning or spending what we don't have at budget time. But then in doing budgeting that way, we do end up, if we're doing it right, with a surplus, which is, luckily what we're looking at. But then also at this point that we're at in the process, we're not seeing that surplus carried forward into our reserve projections, which I also understand, but it might be helpful to see both. It would also be helpful to maybe look at more than one scenario I guess right now what I'm leaning towards is maybe $500,000 on the taxation side, and then also providing some recommendations on tipping fees going forward that do reflect the direction that this board provided when we, had that roundtable and did get the perspective on how we want to do that. So to me, I just feel like there's a bit of a gap here. In the funding source slide, it basically just shows taxation as a funding source. But we do have more than one type of revenue that funds the service. And the other comment that I have is that all the tipping fees are lumped together, and all the tipping fees are not the same. Some of those tipping fees represent us losing a finite resource, which is airspace in itself, and some of them represent something that's pretty operational, which is organic. So getting them lumped in together in our budget I find it's difficult for decision making and seeing what some of the assumptions are that we have around revenue. So it would also be really helpful if we could not treat those the same, because they're not. Thanks.
Thanks, Director McCollum. I think that has been a request in the past, so that we could have that separated out in future. That would certainly be useful. I see Director Chapman online. Do you want to go ahead, Director Chapman?
Thank you, Chair. I agree with what's been said, in particular, Director McCollum. When we had the roundtables, it was pointed comments were made that we prefer this to be user fee driven and not taxation driven. And so I think we need to stay to that. I realize there's a concern of leakage. If the rates get too high, they'll start dumping it somewhere else into the even into the bushes, let alone going to Nanaimo. So I think taxation, if it needs to increase, is the very last resort. And I would like to know where the projected 2.2 million surplus, I know it's just projected, it's not in the bank yet. But where would that go? I didn't see that being reflected in any of the continuity schedules shown for the reserves. Thank you.
Thanks, I can address that. Currently in the proposed budget, as we've mentioned, the surplus amounts are not rolled in there. So we haven't, as been mentioned, take that into account into the reserve calculations at this particular time. Included in that $2.2 million is also about $450,000 worth of unfinished projects. So there is about $1.5 million in there that is additional revenue that absolutely will help our reserves. But not included at this time. It will be rolled into the recommended budget. The surplus is what we would like to see, since we are I think all in agreement around the fact that our reserve balances are low, that surplus will be flown into those reserves in order to help them out as well.
All right, thanks very much. I'll go back to Director Wells online. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just as a follow-up, just listening to some of the conversation and getting back to that percentage difference between tipping fees versus taxation, and maybe even having a target that we work towards, and because as it's been, I think, spelled out here, if we continue to increase the taxation at a much higher rate than the tipping fees, that balance is going to go further out of whack, so to speak. Again, just based on the conversations around making sure that tipping fees are being used to their fullest potential.
All right, thanks, Mayor Wells. So I'm certainly hearing a consensus around the table that we want to see a rebalancing here. And I think it's just consulting with our CAO, and he said that some specific direction would be useful coming out of this meeting for staff to prepare. Want to speak for a moment about that?
Sure, thanks, Mr. Chair. And not to suggest a resolution right now, I recognize we're on receipt, and I just want to draw attention to the recommendation, which is that the proposed financial plan be approved, and for the staff be directed to present the recommended budget to the January 30th meeting If there is a board preference to introduce some lower taxation amount or some adjustment to either the taxation and tipping considerations, then rather than approving this recommendation, we'd look for some direction to that effect, where we would be able to present a recommended budget that considers those different options. At some point, I will ask Mark if he can speak to the lead time needed around tipping fee changes and the impact on municipal contracts for collection. And so there is a lead time that is needed with respect to that. I know that was a big part of the roundtable discussion from a year and a half ago. And I just want to maybe draw some attention to there is a focus on the taxation component here in the staff report. But as we heard Lucy say, there is also consideration for tipping fee increases over time. I think the focus on the taxation component in the staff report is because it is of such interest to the board, and because we know that the board has that on your minds. So it's not to say that the tipping fees is less important or not of a piece of the puzzle. I think, as Lucy also said, there's a balance that we need to strike here between tipping fees and taxation, and so that is all part of this discussion on the proposed budget. And yeah, to summarize, when we get to the point of a recommendation, I think some direction on scenarios or analysis to give some consideration to what a balanced budget for the 25 year can look like would be helpful for staff to be able to come back to you in January. Mark, is it worth adding much to the tipping fee changes and some of that lead time needed?
Yeah, just quickly, just for the board to understand that changing the tipping fees is something that does take time. So there's a requirement to kind of inform the community, but also the municipalities. So it's kind of the waste hauling community and the municipalities that this change is happening, because the municipalities will develop a budget of their own for how much they plan to spend on tipping fees in a certain year. And if it's suddenly changed, then they'll have some budget concerns. So there's usually like a 6-month kind of lead time provided to the municipalities and the industry that the tipping fee is changing, and then the new fee is implemented. So it does take some time for that to work through.
All right, thanks, Mark. So I think it's clear to directors that the timeline for 2025 is simply not available, but for future years, that's a consideration. Just in the interest of time, it's been a lot of good discussion today, but it's getting towards 12:30. I think I might just call for receipt at this point. Is anyone opposed to receipt? And that passes. And perhaps at this point, we can look towards crafting a resolution that expresses the will of the board at this point. And to see the first speaker is Director McCollum. Perhaps you'll have some ideas.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, it's hard to know exactly where the board's at when we're suggesting something that is contrary to what's in the budget. I guess maybe what I would ask is that and I'm not sure how much changes is a reasonable request at this point in the process, but I did suggest $500,000 instead of a full $1 million increase, which would be 10% increase to taxation and a 3% on tipping fees, which is still, triple how we're projecting tipping fees to increase. And I also just wanted to highlight, sorry, I know we're trying to wrap things up, but in our 5-year financial plan, tipping fees increase by 3% going forward every year. And, if we're getting a report that's showing not only a 20% increase to taxation, but further increases beyond that, while tipping fees are basically pegged around inflation, it's not reflective of what the board has wanted. And I recognize it does take time to increase these. So perhaps we could do planning around that as well, rather than just planning around the increases in taxation. So my suggestion would be to amend the financial plan with the $500,000 and with some recommendations around taxation increases over the 5-year financial plan.
Okay, that sounds enough like a motion to me. The staff is that Yeah, I was gonna see if this is a seconder, or are you wanting to second that, or?
Second.
Oh, okay.
Davis.
We have a seconder. Okay, so just so it's on the table for discussion now, and go ahead, Director Therrien.
Okay, I think it would be very dangerous of this board to reduce this taxation amount at this time. We've got over $23 million worth of projects by 2031. That is only 7 years away. A $1 million increase covers $7 million of that. We can look at increasing tipping fees in future years, but if we reduce this to a $500,000 increase and we're only collecting $3 million over the next 7 years, $3.5 million, we are going to be looking at a huge deficit and debt spending amount when it comes time to do all of these landfill closures and the new cell. By increasing it at $1 million this year, at least we're putting ourselves on a footing that we can start looking at increasing tipping fees and being able to meet our obligations when the time comes, without going hugely into debt. I strongly disagree that we should reduce this amount at this time.
Okay, thanks for articulating that, Director Therrien. I appreciate that. We have Director Arbor online. Oh, and sorry, then Director Grant following that. Go ahead, Director Arbor.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate Dr. Therrien's comments. Although I disagree somewhat with them in terms of using the word dangerous. I think because of the whole conversation around tipping fee and dating back 1.5 years ago, I do agree that that is a good path to look to fill the gap. And that is a great tool that most people at this table agrees with, that if we're going to be successful in our diversion, actually tipping fees can be a big contributor to that as people see that the costs go up for themselves, and to look for alternatives that might be free, such as recycling. So yeah, I'm definitely in favor, and I think that the amount that Dr. McCollum put forward is reasonable, and I'll be voting in favor. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Director. And I'll pass it over to Director Grant.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to be clear about the motion because it was kind of it was a bit of a talk and a motion at the same time. So I just want to be clear. So when the motion comes back at whatever time, is it going to be a staff report with this recommendation in it, whereas we can look at it at that point and go, no, we don't like that, we can go back to the other one? Or is it going to come back as here's the new budget that you asked for?
I'd welcome Lucy to add to this if need be, but my understanding is that if this motion is passed, we will be coming back to you with a staff report in January that introduces a recommended budget at that time with this $500,000 value increase in taxation, and consideration for tipping fee increases over time. And it would be then for the board to consider approving that as a recommended budget, or reverting to the budget that's presented today, or providing further direction on additional changes. And I do just want to, as I'm reading that wording, I just want to clarify that the reference to 3% increase in tipping fees, that was more of a commentary on the future of tipping fee increases.
I get the impression that was not meant to be part of the resolution. Yeah. But Director McCollum, go ahead.
Yeah. It's just supposed to say that staff amend the proposed budget to reflect $500,000 increase taxation with recommendations to address tipping fee increases over the 5-year financial plan.
Great. Okay.
Sorry.
Thanks for that.
I should have wrote it down before I started rambling.
Captures the intent,
Yeah.
as I understood it.
Okay, so the point I'm trying to make here is that we're not making a decision today. We're going to get a recommendation back where we can make that decision in the future. So, you know, unless you don't want the information, and I think the information is valuable, right? So I think we should probably do that. And then if you still have the same opinion, vote the other way.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Director Grant. I appreciate you clarifying that there's a further decision point. This is just more information being requested here. Director Grieve, and then I've got a whole bunch of hands online. Okay.
I know this is a small change, but I would recommend a revision of that motion to change the word reflect to consider, because I think there's a lot of moving parts here, and we won't really know where they're at until it comes back with the report. So if I can get a seconder. Is it friendly? Okay, yeah, because I do think that, you know, I'm very cognizant of making decisions on the fly like this. I mean, there's so many moving parts. It's going to affect, it's like a balloon is going to pop out over here. And, you know, all in all, we have to be prudent. We have to look forward. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Director Grieve. And I'm going to ask everyone at this point to really, really be succinct and make points only that are really required at this point. But I think we have the motion. Sorry if I could see people online. There were, I don't know which hand was first. Looks like Director Arbor's spoken, Director Wally's spoken. Is there anyone who hasn't spoken who's online? Can you make that bigger? So Director Dahl, we haven't heard from you. Please go ahead.
I'm just wondering what $500,000 increase is in a percentage increase to requisite.
I think it's 10%, is it not? It's a 5 billion. Sorry, Lucy, go ahead.
Okay, it's a 10% increase to the overall bucket of taxation. As far as calculations on what the effect is on households, you could just, the charts that are in the PowerPoints, you could use that as a gauge. Say
it would be half of that. Yeah, exactly. Okay, great. Did you want to follow up, Director Dahl?
No, I just wanted to know if it was higher or lower than the projected increase for the city of Campbell River. We started at 9% and are down to 3.39. So I don't know how we would support a 10% increase for this user fee when we wouldn't accept that from our own staff. But I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
But you're welcome to, if this is not passed, you're welcome to propose a different amount or an amendment. But for now, I'll go to Director Wally.
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to point out that some of those capital expenditures in that 7-year plan are deferrable to a later date. For example, the transfer station in Tassus, I'm not so sure that it is even decided by the board to be absolutely necessary. Perhaps there's another solution there. And I support this motion. I think it's a good start. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Director Wally. Appreciate how succinct that was. And Director Chapman, I think at that point we'll call the question.
I'll be brief. I'm not going to support the motion, primarily because we had a roundtable where it was discussed and pointed comments were made that we don't want requisition changes and lower user fees. I don't know how much more succinct the board needed to be to make it clear we wanted the user fees increasing and not the requisition. And so I was shocked to see $1 million increase again. We need a policy on how we're going to manage the requisition increase. You know, right now we're just doing willy-nilly. I think we need a policy. This isn't acceptable. I'm not going to support the motion. Thank you.
All right, I appreciate because you expressing that, Director Chapman. I see no further comments in the room. Director Grieve, is something you want to say? Okay. All right. So at this point, seeing no further lights, no further questions, the motion is on the screen, and that is that staff amend the CSWM budget to consider a $500,000 increase to taxation with recommendations to address tipping fee increases over time for the 5-year financial plan. It's been moved and seconded. So all those in favor? All right. And you capturing the votes on this? Okay, well, and now we'll go for the opposed. All those opposed? Yeah. Is there any, we'll scroll down the second, but I don't see. Okay, so we've just got those. And Director Dahl, you did say you're voting against it, but I don't see your hands, but you are still opposed. Excuse me, still opposed. Okay, great. Thanks very much. And Director Moran, you're also opposed?
No, I would actually prefer a roll call. It's difficult online to know
Okay.
how. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so we will do a roll call vote. Director Arbor. Are you
In
opposed?
favor, sorry,
Thank
we
you.
have to turn our mics on.
That's okay, that's okay. Director Baker. Co-Chair Baker.
Opposed.
Okay, Director Chapman.
Opposed.
Director Deck.
Opposed.
Opposed, okay. Director Cole Hamilton, I'm in favor. Director Dahl.
Opposed.
Okay, Director Davis.
In favor.
Director Grant. Director Grieve. Director Hardy.
Opposed.
Director Wells.
In favor.
Thank you. All right, Director Minions. Alternate director, okay, she's left already. Okay, Director Kerr.
Opposed. That's Ron Kerr.
Yeah, thank you. I should make that clearer. Thank you. Yes, Northern Kerr and Director Tyrion opposed. Director Lanyon.
Opposed.
Okay, we don't have anyone from Gold River. Director Mawhinney. Director McCollum. Director Murren.
In favor.
Okay, thank you, Director Rice.
Opposed.
Director Sinnott.
Opposed.
Director Wally.
Yeah, in favor.
Okay, and Director Thiessen.
In favor.
Okay, thanks very much. I'll give staff a moment to just tally that up. Okay, so that was a fairly close vote. It was 41 to 39 on a weighted vote in favor. So the resolution passes. All right, we have, I'm gonna ask staff, how long do we think that item 4 will be?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. The presentation is expected to be on the order of 5-ish minutes. Sarah's giving me the nod to that. And then it's up to the directors on the Q&A. And then the resolution status report, again, there's no specific updates for the board, but we can answer any questions you have. So
I think we may actually, if it's all right, just keep going partially because the CAO and I have to at meeting at 1:30 with the Comox First Nation. So we do need to, so perhaps grab our food on the go. I appreciate everyone's forbearance with this. So we're going to introduce the next agenda item, which is the Solid Waste Management Plan Step 5 Consultation Summary Report. Thank you very much.
thank you, Mr. Chair. And Sarah Willie is here to present a fairly quick update to the consultation report. So Sarah, over to you.
No pressure. Thank you, CAO to the chair. So hopefully folks had a chance to review. I know the package was large today for construction demolition and certainly the budget, most important things. So just wanted to briefly update you on the consultation that we undertook this summer on the solid waste management plan. So we were affectionately calling this 3A as we held some targeted consultation in community and worked diligently on all of the technical memos that we've been bringing to the board this year. So the focus was really in the electoral areas A, B, C, and SRDD, my apologies. And so we held community open houses in Fanny Bay, Union Bay, Huban School, Black Creek, and Oyster River. We also attended events in Quadra and Cortez as they've got some changes pending in their waste management systems there. And we held facility tours at the landfill, so our second open house, and our first open house for the public at the compost facility in Campbell River. And then, of course, we were supporting these with online tools as well. So we had input available to be through our Engage page. In order to get the word out, we felt that there was success last time with mail out for rural residents, recognizing that, the major newspapers in the community and the radio would hit a lot of urban residents, and that wasn't necessarily our targeted audience this summer. So we did a direct mail to 11,000 households, as well as targeting community newspapers, newsletters, postering within the community. We did targeted social media ads and created an animated ad as well that was funded. And then we did for the landfill and organics facility tours where we were targeting everyone. We did print media ads within those publications, including the Comox Valley Record and the Campbell River Mirror. And again, our project landing page had the ability for folks to share on a map, as well as provide just direct input to us. The community open houses were held primarily in the month of July. Certainly a very warm week. I've never sweat so much carrying posters in and out. It was hard. But we had great attendance, certainly in the southern part of the area. Area A, I'd say, was our best attended events. Area D, we had less attendance. I think, primarily just difficult sometimes to get the word out to the right folks. So we'll continue to work on that. But those values are provided within the report. Focusing on the questions that we were asking residents, we were looking at how we can improve their access to diversion. These are residents that do not have a curbside collection of recycling other than Cortez, where the issues were a bit different. So these are the 5 rural events in the electoral areas. And where would be a convenient recycling depot location for you? So trying to promote an alternative conversation to just roadside collection, as we understand that it's a very divided issue within the community. And we did approach the conversation that way, acknowledging the previous conversations and the results of both the referendum and the AAP. So lots of sticky notes. We provided maps and pins, and then that same function was available online too. So we did have engagement from residents in all the communities, which was documented and is summarized within this report. The 2 community outreach events on your left is the beautiful scene in Cortez at Cortez Days. And then on the right in Quadra, we set up at a coffee shop that's just around the corner from our recycling drop-off location. And we were kind of 2-pronged with talking to people at the bins as well as at the coffee house. And Cortez Days, we were at the day itself on the Saturday, and then Sunday morning we spent 2 to 3 hours at the waste management center there chatting with people. The main issues on Quadra, of course, are we're looking to construct the new depot. We wanted to engage with people on preferred hours, recognizing that it's not going to be a 24/7 operation. And of course, there's been some changes there around no longer being able to have garbage bags with a sticker on it. And so a lot of people wanted to talk about different opportunities for disposing of garbage on the island. And on Cortez, there's been some challenges with the cost of the curbside delivery service. So in conjunction with SRD staff, we were chatting with folks about the value that they have, whether they use the curbside service, how it influences their decisions, and then also just observing, how people are using the facility. We've got some themes coming out at the end here, so I won't ruin the surprise. So just some pictures of adorable people taking part in our tours. A little bit of a rainy day for the organics tours. These were held in September, but the landfill day, I think we managed to avoid the rain altogether, which was really, really wonderful. And I will just say, that staff really put in an extra effort for the landfill tour. It happened at a time that was really difficult for them and the passing of their colleague. And so I really appreciate the effort that all the operational staff made in supporting that event and allowing it to happen at all. Really, it was very generous. And then getting into the overall themes, we had Fanny Bay, Oyster River, Black Creek with more support for the roadside collection service, while we saw in sort of Union Bay and Area B events a bit divided on the need. So, some really came in strong and knew this was a chance to get their voice out. Why didn't the AAP succeed? And then others felt the opposite. So definitely not a conclusive result from this round of consultation, which I think is in line with past. We heard over and over, though, that the alternative approval process was not a preferred process for soliciting electoral input on this particular issue. There is an appetite for additional recycling depots in all 5 communities, and something we'll be exploring with the board is, you know, if we were to move that way with increasing populations, how do we fund that? What level of accessibility is appropriate, and what can we afford? And then increase for education. Information, is recycling real or not? You know, and we tried to have those one-on-one conversations as best as we could. Cortez and Quadra, as I mentioned, sort of 2 different issues. Cortez, what I found was really interesting was even those who said straight up, I don't use the curbside collection service, but I'm happy to pay for it. I think there's some people that need it. They don't have cars. It means less people are going to the depot, so it's not as busy when I'm there. Nobody told me they didn't want to pay for it, which was incredible. It is very reasonably priced, but yeah, definitely not the response you might have expected. They do appreciate the free store and certainly the variety of items that beyond Recycle BC that are accepted at the facility. Quadra, with the 4-day work week, you know, they're looking for a preference for weekend access. Evening didn't seem to be as high of a priority. And everyone was excited about the expansion of collection for film foam glass as well as other EPRs at the new facility. Most residents are comfortable with funding coming from taxation, but you know, there's some challenges there for waste rates. For those who are participating in the private collection service, their rates have substantially increased, and so they were challenged there. The regional facility tours are really well rated by those who attend. Everyone's pretty stoked to come. You know, we really want to get across the value and the, you know, the assets that these are to the community, as well as how well they're operated and run. So that was kind of the emphasis of the feedback we're seeking from people during these tours is, do you think they're well managed? Do you think they're an asset? Just to continue to reinforce expansion and growth and just, you know, landing that facility where it is. And then, of course, by the numbers, because everyone loves a good quote. We've got 1,200 unique web visitors, 77 online contributions, which is pretty good. And then we had about 173 at those community outreach events. So that's those 5 events in the electoral areas, and then 89 at the Quadra and Cortez events. We're getting our subscriber numbers up 169. That's pretty good. And then we had 136 and 67 people attending the landfill and compost facility events. As another part of the consultation that many of you participated in were council presentations. So I visited every council as well as the regional district boards and made a presentation. And we also had the Village of Cumberland Council and staff come on a landfill tour with us in, I think it was October. So we were able to get some new faces out there, and certainly, you know, as the host community, we felt that was important. Any questions?
All right, just opening the floor for questions. Not seeing any. Thank you, Sarah. I'm sorry.
No, that's great.
Move through
They'd ask
that so
questions if they
quickly.
wanted.
Okay, all right, then that's just for receipt. Any opposed to receipt? That passes. And next will be the resolution status report for receipt. Moved and seconded. Are there any questions on that? Seeing none, any opposed? That passes, and we'll take a motion for termination. Second, any opposed? I doubt it. Thanks very much, everyone. This was a long one. All right, have a good day.
Thank you.